Everything kicks off with a massive flash of light and energy sparks flying everywhere like something huge just went down. Looking out over the horizon, we see the capital city of the kingdom of Royalis right in the center of the continent, looking pretty peaceful for now. But things weren't always like this. Turns out 100 years back, monsters showed up and started rotting the whole world with this nasty miasma. The only way to fix the mess is through a saint apparently. Only their prayers and magic barriers can heal the earth and keep the monsters away. In a different land up north called Idas, things are going great because they've got 4 incredible saintesses keeping them safe. But it's a different story for Royalis. For 80 years. The gods basically ghosted the place since there weren't any saintesses left to protect it. A bard plays his lute in the street, singing about how a traveling saintess named Lady Myra finally showed up, bringing some much-needed peace with her. Down in the market, the locals are gossiping like crazy. One guy asks if the rumors are true about Prince Arthur and Lady Myra getting engaged. The word around the fruit stands is that Myra's been around for almost a year now, so everyone's expecting a massive ceremony to celebrate the anniversary. People think that's when they'll officially announce the engagement, and honestly, the folks in town couldn't be happier about the news. Everyone in the kingdom is putting their hopes on Lady Myra, thinking she's the one who's gonna light the way for their future. Inside the temple, Myra is busy focusing on her magic when Tool calls out to her from the doorway, just checking in while Myra stands before the massive stained glass of the saints. Tool tells her that breakfast is finally ready, and Myra looks back with a small smile thanking Tool and saying she'll be over there in just a second. As they walk through the palace, Tool mentions the purification process is going great. The barriers are holding up perfectly, but she's still worried because she can feel more monsters showing up every day. Myra says she just wants to do whatever she can to help everyone stop stressing. Tool looks at her and says that's exactly why the news of her engagement to the prince is going to make everyone so happy. Outside in the courtyard, one of the guards spots them and points out where Lady Myra is standing. And then Tool asks if she's already figured out what she's going to say as a greeting, but Myra seems a bit unsure about the whole thing. That's when Prince Arthur shows up with a full squad of knights behind him. Myra greets him and wishes him a good morning. Everything goes south fast when a hand slams against the wall, trapping Lady Myra right where she stands, leaving her hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. Prince Arthur just stands there looking bored while Tool screams out Myra's name. But Tool isn't backing down. She gets right in the prince's face and demands to know what the hell he thinks he's doing. Myra tries to speak up from the ground, but Arthur cuts her off, telling her to shut up and never talk to him so casually again. The knights all draw their swords at once, surrounding the girls as Arthur looks down at Myra, calling her a total fake. He says he's already got the high priest to back him up, claiming that all of Myra's powers are just a cheap counterfeit, and Tool loses it, yelling that there's no way that's true since the prince has seen Myra save people with his own eyes. Arthur just brushes her off like it's nothing, saying that all of that happened in the past because they just found a real saint born right here in the kingdom, and he accuses Myra of just being a really good actress. He starts laughing, telling Myra that her little act is officially over, and that she's being banished from the country immediately. Myra is completely thrown, asking if she's really being kicked out and if the king actually signed off on this, but Arthur doesn't care. He just tells her the king is stuck in bed and that he's the one calling the shots now. He doubles down, saying his word is law and that she should be thanking him for not tossing her out like trash. Myra doesn't fight back, she just looks down and says she understands. She turns her back on all of them, telling Tool it's time to go as they walk past the wall of guards. One of the knights holds up a scroll and yells for everyone to listen, claiming Myra stole her powers from the real saint, Marielle. The crowd looks on in total shock as the guard announces that she's being banished for being a fraud. He keeps going, telling everyone the high priest was in on the scam and is being thrown in a cell right now, leaving the townspeople watching Myra walk away. Some of them still can't believe it and call out to her as she passes. Everyone is starting to freak out, asking what's going on and where she's going, but Myra just keeps moving. People in the crowd start screaming for the saintess to answer them, calling out Myra's name as she tries to walk past. But the mob is getting nasty, asking if she was just lying to them the whole time. There's a brief, heavy silence as the townspeople just stare at her in disbelief. But then the reality starts to sink in, with people asking if it's really true that she's being kicked out. The mood turns toxic fast, and a guy yells out, asking if she's finally going to admit she's guilty. A bearded man demands to know why she's staying silent while others say how much they used to trust her. The insults keep flying, with a woman screaming that Myra was probably just laughing at all of them. And the crowd starts losing it, yelling that she made fools out of them and telling her to stop messing around. As Tool and Myra keep their heads down and keep moving, someone yells out asking what kind of saintess she is, leaving the townspeople pointing fingers and shouting about how they can't believe they ever respected her. The crowd is completely losing it, with people screaming that she's a total fake and asking if she actually enjoyed lying to them this whole time. Tool tries to check on her, but Myra just says she's doing fine. Someone in the mob grips a rock like they're ready to throw it while a kid watches from a window, but a few people try to hold the others back, warning them to stop before they get cursed by her. Guards have to use their spears just to keep the angry mob from swarming Myra as she walks through. And even with everyone hating her, she just gives a polite bow and wishes them a good day. As the massive gates finally shut, someone mutters about how disappointed they are in the whole situation. Once they're alone, Tool breaks down, saying the punishment is way too harsh and asking why Myra didn't defend herself. Myra just keeps walking, telling her it didn't look like anyone there was actually interested in listening to her, explaining that everyone had their minds made up from the start, though Tool still thinks the people would have listened. The mob has no idea they're yelling at the third princess of the Ida's kingdom, but Myra just stands there quietly. It turns out she's trying to help out without even using her real title. Looking back to a meeting where the king of Royalis was told his request was getting pretty personal. The king knew it was a big ask, but he wanted to welcome her as a traveling saintess rather than a princess. And Myra didn't mind at all. She told him she'd be more than happy to accept the role. Not everyone was on board though, as a woman argued with her brother about sending a 15-year-old so far away without any help. Later, as Myra gets ready to leave, her mother explains that being a saintess is about the future, telling Myra to just focus on loving the people and earning their love in return. Myra promises to do exactly that, vowing to use her power to bring real peace. Back at the palace, Myra looks a bit nervous while Arthur stands there with a smirk. Myra looks back on everything and realizes she could have proven who she was at any time. All she had to do was show everyone her real power. But she knows that even if the people saw the truth, Prince Arthur would still refuse to acknowledge her being there. And if she tried to resist, it would just turn into a huge ego trip for him. He'd probably end up using force to get his way. Myra thinks about how the local soldiers would be the ones getting hurt just for following orders. As Tool calls out to her, Myra decides she can't do that to them. She remembers Arthur being kind in the past, even if this whole situation feels like it was rigged overnight. Deep down, she really wanted to eventually reveal her true identity and live her life as the saintess of this country, but that's over now. She tells her group they can't stay any longer. It's time to head back home to Ida's. Since a new saint has supposedly been born here in Royalis, Myra reaches out to her magic and realizes that leaving her old barrier up will only hold her back from using her full power later on. Myra officially decides she isn't needed in this kingdom anymore. She shatters the spell and prepares to walk away. Myra decides it's time to go and tells the group they should leave right now. They start walking away, leaving the castle behind. Tool points out that the trip back to the Ida's border is going to be a really long walk, so she says they should probably stop at a nearby town first to get some supplies ready. Tool knows the road isn't safe, so she suggests heading to the local adventurers guild. They need to find some muscle to keep them safe from monsters and any thugs they might run into. Tool is firm about the fact that they need to hire a professional escort, and as they pass the gate, a guard warns them that it's nothing but wasteland ahead. He tells them to be careful, and Myra looks back at the kingdom one last time. She says goodbye and honestly hopes the people there find some way to prosper. But it doesn't take long for things to fall apart. With the barrier gone, massive monsters show up and start wrecking the city. Buildings are burning and people are losing everything. One guy on the ground can barely breathe as he stares at a ring and says the word saintess. He looks out at the ruins of his home and just can't understand why any of this is happening. Myra looks pretty down as she walks, thinking to herself about how she's still stuck wearing this heavy coat, even though the sun is beating down on them. Tool looks over and asks her how she's holding up, so Myra just gives her a small smile and says she's doing fine, which leads them further toward the border with Ida's, a place filled with nothing but mountains and rough land, making the trip look even longer on the map as they move from the capital toward a small spot called Tomtrace. It's a bit of a hike, but eventually they make it to the town and see the streets are packed with people going about their day. Later on, Myra is just staring out a window when a knock at the door breaks the silence. Tool calls out to her and peeks her head inside to say it's finally time to go. She tells Myra they need to get over to the guild right away, so she hands over some different clothes and tells the princess she needs to change into something less noticeable before they leave. Myra throws on a hooded cloak to keep her face hidden and they head straight for a large, sturdy-looking building. The door creaks as they step inside, and they immediately feel the eyes of all the rough adventurers in the room landing on them. Myra and Tool walk up to the guild counter to check on their plans. Myra tells the staff she already put in a request under the name Maria. The receptionist confirms the order and mentions it's for an escort to the Ida's border. Though lately, those kinds of jobs have been getting pretty common, so the guy behind the desk double-checks the paperwork. He asks if they're specifically looking for the adventurers named Maria and Olivia. He tells them there's someone who can help, but they're busy with another job and won't be back until tomorrow. Just as Myra repeats the word, some heavy footsteps start closing in from behind. A group of rough-looking guys towers over them, and the leader asks if the two ladies are in a big rush. The guy with the eye patch leans in with a shady grin. He tells them they're lucky because his crew will guide them for free. Tool looks pretty worried, but Myra just keeps her cool and gives them a polite smile. She says they aren't in a hurry and will just come back tomorrow instead. The girls turn to leave, but the bald guy in the group isn't having it. He starts stomping after them, yelling about why they're being so cold. He tries to reach for them, but suddenly the front door swings open and smacks him right in the face, leaving him doubled over in pain. His boss starts laying into him for being an idiot and freezing up at the door, while the bald guy just tries to blame the door for hitting him. The adventurers lose the trail in the brush. One guy yells out that there's nothing there, and he tries to argue he felt something just a second ago, but his leader just calls him slow. They've completely lost sight of the girls as Myra realizes they need to get out of the kingdom fast. She can't believe how sketchy this town is compared to the last one, so back at the inn, she tells Tool about the false saint rumors spreading. She's worried that staying too long will just put a target on their backs. Tool looks at her, confused about how they're paying for everything. She asks where the money for the room and clothes came from, since she was under the impression that Myra had escaped the capital with nothing but the clothes on her back. Myra reaches into her things and explains that before she left Ida's, Lady Ada actually gave her some precious metals to hold onto, thinking of her mother. She explains the metals were meant to be an emergency fund for the road. She just never expected to actually need them. She looks down with a small smile, saying she'll have to give her mom a big thank you once she finally gets back home. The room goes quiet for a second. Myra just sits there, wondering what her brother is going to think about all of this. Myra looks down, thinking about her brother. They had just told him about her engagement right before she got banished, and she knows he's going to be livid. He's the type to say that King Lloyd, Lady Ada, and even her own sisters shouldn't be forgiven for this, claiming that neither the people nor he will ever accept the way Royalis is treating her. Back in the room, Myra tells Tool that while they were at the guild, she picked up on some very specific rumors about this genuine saintess, noting that the girl is named Marielle. Apparently she's from Yahello County and just happens to be 16. Exactly the same age as Myra. The stories describe her as having golden hair and blue eyes, making her sound like the perfect hero. The rumor goes that she's barely aware of her own strength, just accidentally performing miracles that keep the whole country running. But that's when the false saintess supposedly showed up. The story says Myra only appeared to steal all the glory and mess up Marielle's hard work. Myra sighs, realizing that someone must have spent a long time planning and spreading these lies. She points out one more weird detail to Tool. Marielle is supposedly the orphan of the Count's brother, which makes Myra wonder why she's only being found right now. Myra thinks back to 10 years ago. A monster attack hit the Count's land, leaving his brother dead and his kid missing. The story goes that the Count eventually tracked the kid down at an orphanage, and that's right when her powers started showing up. Myra keeps thinking about that 10-year timeline, realizing it's way too convenient, especially since it's the same time the southern Ledi Kingdom got wiped out. With the High Priest backing it, the whole thing feels like a total setup. Tool chimes in, reminding Myra that the Crown Prince can't fix everything when the whole country has been planning this betrayal for years. She tells Myra that maybe it's time to stop carrying the weight of the whole kingdom on her shoulders, and Myra actually agrees, smiling as she says she's just going to leave the rest of the mess for her brother to deal with. They decide to get some sleep since they're heading out on a long journey first thing tomorrow, so Myra finally relaxes and falls fast asleep as the long day ends. She knows that because of her barrier, no other saintess is actually going to be able to use their powers correctly. Myra stares out at the dark sky through the cross-shaped window, thinking about her own bloodline, including her mother and sisters. She wonders if the problem is just her lack of experience or if she's just not a good match for the power, but she honestly doesn't know. Everything feels completely different now, and she tells Tool that it feels like she's landed in a whole new world in just 24 hours. She thinks about the Ledi Kingdom getting wrecked overnight despite having its own saintess, a disaster that sent monsters and refugees everywhere. It's going to take about 10 days for the barrier she left behind to fully wear off, leaving Myra worried that if Marielle's powers can't actually handle the monsters on their own, then the reality is simple. The entire country is pretty much doomed. Standing alone in the middle of the room, Myra wonders if there's actually nothing she can do if there's no place for her here. Tool speaks up and apologizes for the rough living conditions they're stuck with, but Myra just gives a tired smile and says it's fine, asking Tool to stop calling her princess, until they finally make it back home. Back at the guild, the receptionist spots Myra and checks if she's the one going by the name Maria. She confirms the identity and lets her know that the escort they talked about is already there waiting, so the receptionist leans in and whispers for her not to worry. Apparently, this guy is a total professional who won't make any weird requests. She turns toward the seating area and calls out, announcing to the room that the clients have finally arrived. The guy's name is Raul, and he's just sitting there looking moody with a massive sword wrapped in cloth leaning against the table, making Myra feel a bit of the tension as Raul stands up and gives his new clients a quiet, serious look over. It's time to move out, so Raul leads Myra and Tool through the narrow stoneback alleys of the town. As they walk, Raul mentions that taking a contract to protect a young lady in trouble is actually a pretty solid deal, and noticing the girls are looking a bit on edge, he tells them they should just try to calm down. He keeps it blunt, saying that basically everyone who travels in and out of this town sees the situation the same way he does. Raul lets out a sigh, pointing out that their spotless clothes hidden under filthy cloaks actually makes them stand out even more. He grabs Tool's arm to get her attention, making it clear he has no interest in blowing their cover or finding out who they really are, so he tells them to just follow his lead if they want to make it to the border without getting bothered by any more local thugs. Tool looks pretty drained from the tension, but she agrees and tells Myra they should probably get moving before things get worse. They head down some stone stairs into a dark tunnel that opens up into a hidden shop where an old woman is waiting behind a counter. The place is packed with all kinds of weapons and gear, and Raul explains that this is the spot where adventurers come to get properly equipped for travel. He tells them they're safe here because the shop doesn't leak info on its customers. Then he turns to Myra and asks what she wants to do regarding magic supplies. Myra looks a bit nervous as she gives him the fake name Olivia, mentioning that magic is a bit of a complicated subject for her. Raul just nods and calls her Olivia, then he reaches over toward one of the shelves to grab something for her to try on. It turns out to be a black travel hood with cat ears on top. Myra puts it on but can't help feeling like she looks like a little kid in it. She looks a little unsure of herself, but Raul catches her off guard by telling her it actually looks great on her. Myra is totally frozen with this shocked look on her face after putting on the cat ear hood, and then Raul asks her if she actually knows how to use a sword or has any kind of fighting style. Tool just stands there looking a bit over the whole situation while someone points out that the outfit is really just a spoof and nothing serious. Myra catches a glimpse of herself in the mirror, staring at the reflection of the girl in the cat hood with a pretty blank expression like she can't believe this is the plan. Raul tells her straight up not to take that hood off, pointing out that there's no way they can hide her silver hair any other way. Myra realizes she hadn't even thought about that until now, so she decides to handle things her own way and starts using her power to change how she looks. Raul is completely caught off guard by what she's doing and asks if that's some kind of magic, wondering if it's even possible to pull off something like that. Myra thinks to herself about how there are a few things in common between a saint's power and regular magic, figuring there's no way he'll be able to guess who she really is now. She looks back at him while playing with her hair, telling him it's just one of the ways her power works and asking if he thinks it's that weird. She keeps up the act with a nervous smile, telling herself that the explanation she just gave isn't technically a lie. Raul just stares at her for a second with those sharp eyes of his, and admits that having a skill like that is actually pretty convenient for their trip. It's a long trek ahead, and the word around the market is that walking all the way to the Ida's border is going to take 10 days to 2 weeks, at least. Raul points out that the trip will probably take even longer than that, especially with the roads being in such bad shape from the recent storms. He tells Myra to lighten her load and make sure she only picks out food that's going to last a while on the trail. Good advice, since Tool is standing there just thinking about how 10 days is a pretty long time to be out there. Looking at Myra in her new outfit, Tool thinks the disguise is actually working for blending in, but she still wonders if trusting Raul is the right move. Raul calls out for them to follow him, letting them know he already got all the preparations finished and everything is ready to go. He leads the way out, telling the girls it's time to move as they finally start their journey together. The group walks past a carriage heading out of town, and Myra makes sure to thank Raul for taking care of everything so far. She gets a little bashful and admits that she's pretty clueless about how things work out in the world, but Raul tells her not to sweat it since his guidance is part of the price, adding that he's heard she's a sheltered young lady anyway. Myra looks up, a bit surprised as she adjusts to the trail. She mentions she made sure to bring most of her bags along for the trip. Raul takes a look at her and mentions how rare someone like her is, which catches her off guard. The sun starts setting and Myra can't help but notice Raul's hair. She tells him it looks beautiful, almost like it's melting into the orange sky. Raul admits that's a first for him. Most people usually tell him his hair is just the color of destruction. So Myra looks at him closely, taking in his red hair and darker skin. She calls out his name because she's curious and asks if he actually comes from the Ledi Kingdom. Raul doesn't say a word, just keeping his face turned away. Suddenly, a carriage comes flying down the road, kicking up a ton of dust as it speeds right past the group. Tool and Raul watch it go, noting how the carriage looks like it's weighed down with a massive amount of luggage. It's clearly in a hurry. Word on the street is that a fake saint is fleeing the capital for the countryside. Raul just keeps walking as the rumors fly around them. Tool looks pretty worried, sweating a bit as she realizes those rumors are spreading faster than they thought. Myra looks pretty worried under her hood as she hears about the fake saint being kicked out. She asks if that means the real saint, the one the high priest actually likes, is the one everyone will welcome now. Raul keeps walking with his massive pack and says he doesn't think there will be any riots over the saint being banished. He thinks people will probably start talking about using the saintless instead, and adds that it's about time for the saint to start causing some real trouble herself. He keeps talking as they pass through the crowd, saying that no matter which way things go, any place where this kind of mess starts happening is eventually just going to end up destroyed. Raul wonders if the fake is so pissed about being expelled that she might just curse everyone, since that kind of hate usually just makes disasters spread even faster. He figures that anyone who actually sees the writing on the wall should probably just pack up and run while they still can. Looking dead serious, Raul says this is just the saint's justice, and it's what the people who believe in her have to deal with. As they walk together, Raul mentions that this country might be next on the list for the false saint to destroy, and Myra looks down, finally admitting to Tool and Raul that there are just so many things about this world she doesn't actually know yet. Raul tells Myra that whatever she doesn't know yet is exactly what she's going to have to learn from here on out, and just like that, they run into a huge landslide blocking the whole road. The rain made the ground way too soft, and someone says it'll take weeks or even months to clear the mess, leaving Olivia looking pretty stressed. She asks if they're really stuck there or if there's any way they can keep moving forward. So, a guy with the group explains that the carriages can't get through this junk. Since they can't just ditch the horses and wagons, they're going to have to turn back and find another route. He points out that even trying to hike around the slide is a bad idea because the whole area is unstable and could fall apart at any second, which really worries Tool. She says the mountain roads are already tough and the weird weather makes it worse, so they have to think about Olivia's safety first. The group huddles up in a small room to figure things out. Myra listens to the plan and agrees that it makes sense, suggesting they just lay low in this town until the roads are actually usable again. She thinks staying put is their best bet for staying safe for now. Raul doesn't really care either way. He says he's not bothered by the wait since he gets paid for however long the escort job lasts, and Tool starts folding up the map, telling the group they just need to focus on staying away from any more unexpected trouble. Tool looks down, mentioning she was wondering if Royd would send someone to check on them since he was so worried about losing contact, and she notes that as long as Myra is around, there are actually plenty of ways for them to reunite with him later on. Tool goes on to talk about how her brother is a really kind guy, saying he's the type who is both smart and stays calm no matter what. She explains that he truly believes humans shouldn't be fighting each other in this world, and admits he gets that way better than she does. The two of them talk in their room, and Tool says that sooner or later Royalis won't be able to avoid this mess. She thinks if her brother is the one handling it, he'll just hide how he feels to keep things peaceful, but she figures the royalty and the people are still going to be pretty shaken up. Myra listens, thinking maybe Marielle will be the one to back her up when things get crazy. Myra looks pretty determined and says she's going to handle everything, even if she isn't in a huge rush to get it done right this second. She adds that regardless of how things look, she doesn't feel like she's supposed to just stay put where she is right now, and Tool points out that while they've been traveling, rumors about Myra's banishment have been following them everywhere. She's worried the news has already reached her brother's ears, probably sounding even worse than the truth, leaving Myra wondering if her brother can really stay level-headed forever once he hears what's been going on. Myra looks ahead, explaining that's why she wants to tell everyone as soon as she can that she's safe and doesn't want any more fighting. Tool looks at her, questioning if that is actually what the kingdom of Royalis wants from her too, since she remembers being told to be a saint who follows her heart and stays loved by her people until the next one is born. She admits she doesn't know any other way to live now that she has no home to go back to, while Raul stands there listening as Myra holds her chest, saying she made a promise to her mother that she would be this specific kind of saint. She smiles a bit, figuring her brother is probably out there searching all over the kingdom for her since he has no idea where she went, so Tool just looks at her with a soft expression, admitting she pretty much figured Myra was going to say something like that. She mentions there's another path they can take, a detour that woodcutters use to move lumber through the area, and even though it's going to take some time, it'll be a lot faster than waiting for the collapsed cliff to get fixed. Myra looks down, thinking it over, and asks if they would be able to cross the mountain way easier if they just left her behind. Tool looks down, reminding Myra that she was actually trained and educated to be a guard. So Myra makes a big call, telling Tool she's going to take a detour with Raul while Tool leads the way on the main mountain path. She explains it's safer to split up the info meant for her brother and asks Tool for this huge favor. Tool agrees and says she'll go get everything squared away with Raul, who just shrugs it off, saying all this extra effort is already included in the price he's charging. Tool takes the letter, planning to hit the guild's courier once she's over the mountain to head north fast. Raul explains that since adventurers and travelers use the same route, he can just blend in to stay under the radar. As Tool starts to walk away, Myra tells her she's sorry for all this, knowing Tool is the one taking the biggest risk. Tool just gives a soft smile, even though she's thinking about how they've literally never been apart since they were little kids. Tool bows her head low, asking Myra to forgive her for saying too much before telling her to stay safe. And Myra thanks her, telling her to be safe too as she starts walking away with a heavy heart. As they head into the forest, Raul suddenly asks her how she can even trust a guy like him, but Myra just watches him, noticing how good he is at making the whole trip feel a lot safer. She thinks back to his advice about not needing to know everything and wonders if he was just trying to be helpful. So she smiles and tells him he's probably a really kind person deep down. Raul doesn't miss a beat, just calling her a typical sheltered young lady while they keep moving, until a memory hits him, a woman's silhouette telling him it's his responsibility to save whoever is left. The woman in his head yells for him to run, saying the royal family only survives if he stays alive. As he realizes he's stuck in another dream about that day, watching a figure disappear into the light. Raul walks ahead through the thick trees until he spots the forest man's cabin, mentioning how it marks the edge of the mountains and the clear path. He looks back at Myra with a serious face, warning her that taking the beast route is going to be a real struggle in more ways than one. Myra is already falling behind, leaning against a tree to catch her breath while Raul watches her, seeing how tired she's getting. As she tries to keep moving, Raul asks if this feels way different than flat ground, explaining that the slope wrecks your legs and lungs even if it looks smooth. He decides they need to take it slow, telling her they'll take lots of breaks and probably camp out twice to make it through. Raul suggests finding a lower path with fewer hills even if it takes longer, and thinks they should head back to town for more supplies first. Myra looks down with a guilty expression, her mind drifting back to Tool and the heavy goodbye they had earlier. She tries to shake it off, telling herself it's okay as she keeps huffing and puffing while following Raul deeper into the woods. Suddenly, she finds a second wind and looks up with a determined face, shouting out that she's going to give it her all. Raul just looks back at her, acknowledging that she's definitely got some spirit, but he tells her she really shouldn't push herself too hard. Myra tells Raul she really wants to help him out, but she's worried that if she gets hurt, Maria might actually try to kill him. And while she talks, Raul just focuses on the campfire as they settle in for the night. Myra stares at the flames, mentioning how being out here makes her memories feel way more clear. Raul looks over at her with a calm expression, telling her she did a great job handling the rough walk today. He hands her some food and warns her that things are about to get a lot tougher once they move past this area. Myra takes a drink, admitting that even the downhill parts are hard because you lose your balance so fast. Raul takes a bite of his own meal, saying it's actually nice to see her hanging in there like this. He gets a bit more serious, telling her they have to be ready because this is exactly where monsters start showing up, and he explains that the further they get from the palace's magic barrier, the more the land gets filled with miasma that breeds all kinds of creatures. Raul notes that while guys like him or regular soldiers can fight the monsters off, they can't actually purify the bodies afterward. Only a saint can do that. Myra looks up from her mug and asks if he's seen it happen with his own eyes, clarifying she's not just talking about the monsters that are currently walking around. Raul looks up at the dark trees surrounding their camp, admitting that what she's saying might actually be the truth. The camp is quiet for the night as Myra sleeps on a bed of leaves. Raul stays awake by the fire, slowly sharpening his knife. Raul thinks back to how Myra promised her mother she'd become a truly kind saint, and as he looks at her sleeping, he remembers telling her that her actual nature is probably just kind, which seemed to catch her totally off guard. But things get dark fast when he remembers the truth. It was the real saint who actually wiped out his entire country. He can't help but laugh at the idea of being called a kind person, his eyes showing just how much that thought messes with him. Flashback to earlier at the guild, someone is losing their mind, demanding that a new person gets hired immediately no matter who it is, while the receptionist tries to play it cool. She tells the guy she'll look into it, but he really needs to settle down first. The guy snaps back that he is calm, then asks if she's lived under a rock and missed all the scary rumors, saying this mess is exactly why he didn't want to step foot in this country. Lady Ada stands nearby looking stressed, worried about getting caught in some security nightmare. The receptionist just keeps her professional smile on, nodding along and saying she understands, but they need to focus on the first step. This big guy and his crew walk up to the ladies, asking if they're in some kind of trouble. Then the scruffy dude with the beard jumps in, telling them they can just leave everything to his team. The guy with the mustache tries to act all cool, saying he might look a bit rough, but he's a total pro. And he makes sure to mention that guys like him never lie when it comes to contracts. He tells Lady Ada she can stop worrying since they'll get her where she needs to go quickly and responsibly, but the whole vibe feels a bit off, leading to Raul standing there thinking back to someone begging for help and promising it wouldn't take long. He's clearly got something heavy on his mind until the receptionist snaps him out of it by calling him Kazami, which seems to be the name he's using while he stands there at the counter. She's looking super hyped and tells him it's actually perfect timing. Apparently a request just came through that's basically made for him. Raul takes the paper and reads it over, seeing that the clients are looking to head all the way out to the Ida's kingdom border. He immediately realizes that the names Maria and Olivia are totally fake, and he remembers the woman was hiding her face while traveling with a girl who definitely didn't belong in a place like this. He looks at the receptionist and asks why she thinks this job is only something he can handle, since it seems like a lot of trouble. She explains that the client didn't just ask for him, they dropped a massive pile of gold coins as a down payment right on the spot. The receptionist explains that while the guild is supposed to be welcoming, they're seriously low on people to handle things, which is why Lady Myra's calm vibe stands out so much. She's just sitting there looking totally unbothered while the receptionist thinks to herself that these people aren't just here for fun, especially not a high-class lady. They definitely came to this specific guild for a reason. Raul watches the group of rowdy adventurers at the stairs and says he can tell what they're up to. There's no way he's leaving the girls with guys like that. He tells the receptionist to make the clients wait just one more day, staring down at the request form on the counter, until he mentions he's actually curious about the rumors involving that fake saint from Royalis. He explains that he needs to dig up some info, and the timing is basically perfect since those two might be connected to the fake saints group. The receptionist looks worried and points out that the cash they're using is actually what they grabbed when they bylaid on the castle, and she says she'll pass along the message, but she's not sure what they'll do if they can't wait. They might just hire some fast talker and disappear. Raul looks serious and says it won't matter since nobody is going to get along with them anyway, not with their attitude and the situation they're stuck in. Raul stares ahead with a cold look, telling the receptionist that those guys over there simply can't afford a life like his. The receptionist gives him a soft smile, asking if he's really going to be able to just walk away and abandon them like that. Suddenly, a loud adventurer yells at her, demanding to know what she was just whispering about with Raul, but she stays professional and just asks if he wants a quest. The receptionist keeps her cool while a big bearded guy nearby notes that she's the type who only talks about certain topics, keeping things strictly business, while Raul walks through the town square. Someone asks what all the noise is about as a guy announces that Prince Arthur has just put out a formal decree. People in the crowd start losing it, shouting that Myra isn't a real saint and that all those nasty rumors were actually true. The word spreads that she was kicked out earlier today. The townspeople are furious, calling her shameless for tricking the prince and the whole kingdom by playing pretend. Someone asks what the real Saint Marielle is actually like, while another guy says he feels bad for Prince Arthur for having to put up with Myra for a whole year. One guy is practically screaming, going on about how Myra just went around showing off her fake silver hair to everyone, and the whole crowd is totally turning on her, saying she's the one to blame and they'll never forgive her for being such a fraud. Raul is listening to the crowd talk trash, but he knows they've got it all wrong. It's definitely not her, and he just can't believe what he's hearing. He stands there taking it in while a guy nearby repeats Myra's name like he's trying to process the news. He tries to act like it's no big deal, saying it doesn't exactly look like the end of the world yet. Another guy admits he isn't sure what to think since the whole situation doesn't make sense, wondering where these rumors even started. Someone else points out that the king made a formal announcement before banishing Myra, and the people around him agree that facts are all that matters. They start talking about how they need to get behind Marielle now since Prince Arthur is the one supporting her. Word starts going around that Marielle is a blonde, and someone even spotted her carriage heading straight for the castle as the mood gets even darker. An old man says the merchants are already bailing, and they always run when things get risky, making him think the whole country is headed for ruin. A woman nearby looks totally lost, saying they can't just leave with the kids, and they wouldn't even have anything to eat if they tried to run. Raul watches the crowd and realizes the lies are already spreading everywhere. People aren't even mad or shocked anymore. They're just acting like it's fine since they have Marielle now, which leads to a guy in the crowd yelling about how things used to be. He calls for everyone to raise a glass to Marielle, calling her the only real saint, while others start wondering where Myra even went after the banishment. One guy starts talking tough, saying if he saw her, he'd knock her out himself. The mood is getting selfish, with one guy admitting he doesn't care who the saint is as long as he stays safe. Others are just relieved the wedding was cancelled, thinking it's crazy an outsider almost became royalty, and the gossip just keeps going. Someone asks if the temple didn't actually heal people's real medical problems before, wondering if an imposter could even do that, but his friends tell him to shut up before anyone hears him. They keep wondering if Myra just had enough power to fake it well enough to trick everyone from the throne. They're convinced she's lost now that she's been kicked out, so Raul just walks away, but further down the road, things are clearly getting worse. It's the same story everywhere. The whole place feels cursed while people in the back are screaming for help. In a country like this, things turn ugly fast. A group of nasty-looking guys shows up with weapons, looking for trouble, and then someone starts begging for help. One of the thugs reaches out to grab a small person in the alley, but Raul punches a guy and clears the whole crowd with one big swing. Lady Myra looks relieved and thanks Raul, promising to pay him whatever she can as long as he acts as her escort, while a thought lingers about how people with real power don't always use it the way they're supposed to. The doubt is heavy. There's just no way to trust the person everyone is calling a saint right now. Back at the guild, the receptionist yells for Raul because his clients have arrived, but he just sits at the table looking exhausted from everything. Later on, Raul tells the group he managed to find them a place to stay for the night, so he suggests they eat before it gets dark. He mentions the inn doesn't serve food and that they'll get their supplies tomorrow before heading out. As they walk, Myra starts worrying about Maria's trip to the next town. She really hopes she makes it over the mountain without getting hurt and figures Maria is probably fine if she found a wagon to ride in. She thinks about how the extra money they shared could help her out with other travelers. Raul and Myra keep moving through the village together while the locals just watch them pass by. Raul stops near a building and tells Myra to just wait right there for a bit. Raul tells Myra to stay right where she is and promises he'll be back before she knows it, and Myra just stands there looking a little confused. But she agrees to wait for him while she thinks about how Raul finally needs a break to eat and sleep. She knows he's wiped out from 3 days of guarding her in the mountain. Meanwhile, some rough-looking guy in a hood complains about how things in town are getting totally out of control, and a whole group of these hooded people starts marching through the village streets together. They're all armed and looking for someone, making the whole vibe of the area feel pretty tense. One of them stops and points at a girl, asking her straight up if her name is Myra, but the girl looks totally annoyed and asks who they even think they are. They keep pressing her to see if she's Myra, but then one of them notices her hair color doesn't match and realizes they got the wrong person. Suddenly, Raul grabs Myra and starts moving fast, so she asks why they're heading back to the mountains when it's already getting dark. Raul and Myra ditch the village and head for the high ground. Raul mentions the inn was already handed over, so they need to get up the mountain where the townspeople can't see them. Raul reveals he knew exactly who those guys were. They're the private army of Count Yahello, and he recognized the emblem on their gear. Myra puts the pieces together and realizes the Count is the same person who took Marielle in, which makes the whole situation way worse. Raul drops the real news. Those soldiers are specifically hunting for Myra because they think she's a fake saint. So he explains he saw them cornering every girl about her height to check their faces. He's not totally sure what's up, but it's definitely a targeted search. Myra is totally wiped out, wondering how they even got there from the capital since the main road is buried under a landslide. Raul explains they probably used the lower trails they skipped earlier, especially since he spotted a mountain horse parked outside of town. He figures it's the work of a landowner who knows the shortcuts around these peaks. He tells Myra she was smart to keep moving instead of staying on the far side of the mountain, because if they hadn't started running when they did, the soldiers likely would have tracked them down by now. Raul tells Myra they're setting up camp for the night. He explains that if they keep moving and light a fire, the soldiers will definitely spot them. Myra stops him right there, looking like she has something big on her mind. She asks why he even let her escape in the first place. She's confused why he'd help her when he knew the army was looking for a fake saint. Raul just looks at her. He says he knew what was going on from the very beginning. He tells her straight up that he knows her name isn't Olivia and she isn't some fake. He knows she's actually Myra, the real saint of Idas. Raul starts thinking back, realizing he doesn't actually hate every saint out there. Even though he's solo now, he remembers being a weak kid thrown into a world of thieves and total violence. Back then, he had 0 people to rely on, so he just did whatever he could to survive. 10 years went by while he was just trying to stay alive, and there were plenty of times he thought he was done. He spent a long time wishing someone would just show up and help him. He thinks about a moment where he shouldn't have let go. It's a strange feeling, but he realizes he was never really alone after all. Raul thinks back to being a kid, remembering when he lost his parents and his home, having absolutely nothing to return to. He was a mess back then, crying and wondering what he was supposed to even believe in if he couldn't trust a saint. Sitting by a fire with a knife in his hand, he decided the only thing he could trust was himself, even if that feeling was weak. Back in the present, Myra is fast asleep. She thinks about how soft the bed feels while she's dreaming. Raul watches her, wondering why she's even in this country when she was kicked out of her own home for being a fake. He's impressed that she never lost sight of who she was. Despite how badly everyone treated her looking at her sleeping face, he realizes she actually trusts him enough to fall asleep right next to him so soon. He thinks it's because she's so sure of herself that she's able to put her faith in other people like that. Sitting there in the dark, it finally clicks. He remembers exactly how he recognized she was Princess Myra the moment they met. His mind goes way back to the days before his home country, Ledi, was completely wiped out. Raul's memory goes back to the time before that saint ever showed up, back when the former king of Edas led his own personal army into the Ledi kingdom to help them out after a bunch of demon attacks. Young Raul really wanted to say thanks to the king, but he was too proud and ended up just hiding behind his brother's back. The king didn't mind at all and just laughed it off, while Raul's brother showed the man nothing but respect. Looking at them, Raul realized he actually envied that kind of connection and really wanted it for himself, specifically remembering how the king looked back then, tenderly holding a small baby in his arms. Back in the room, Raul finally comes clean and apologizes, admitting he was just pretending not to know who she was. Myra is totally caught off guard. She starts panicking because thinking about those old days stresses her out, especially since she thought her cover was solid. She starts crying and apologizing right back, feeling completely embarrassed about the whole situation. Raul just watches her, explaining that while he usually sticks to his own opinions and beliefs. Raul looks down at Myra, who's still totally losing it, and points out that she stayed with him even though he already knew her secret. Myra keeps crying, calling herself a bad person for trying to hide behind a fake act and tricking him this whole time. Raul just looks at her with a straight face and says she's actually right about that, which just makes her freak out even more. But then Myra finally settles down. She looks him in the eye and tells him it's a real pleasure to meet him again, formally introducing herself as the third princess of Edas, which catches Raul off guard since he didn't realize that's where she was from. Looking at her, Raul can't help but wish he could actually take her back to her home, so he just gives her a genuine smile and thanks her again for everything. He starts thinking that maybe now he can finally respect his own past and feel a little bit proud of himself. But the scene shifts to the king, who mentions that the last saintess born in their kingdom was actually about 80 years ago. His advisor chimes in, remembering how that lady married the king's younger brother and ended up being treated like garbage. The king continues the history lesson, explaining how that past saintess was actually pretty weak, only having enough power to make simple lucky charms. Since most saintesses usually came from rich noble families, everyone looked down on her and treated her like trash because she was just a girl from an orphanage, and even the king back then, who was his own ancestor, wouldn't show her any respect. He mentions the couple never ended up having kids either, which led to the kingdom never seeing another saintess born there since. Now, everyone around the world says it's a curse for how they bullied her, calling Royalis a cursed place that's been totally abandoned by the gods, which the king points out is a reputation they both know well. But then he brings up some big news word has reached them that a traveling saintess with actual healing powers is headed their way. The king looks Arthur in the eye and tells him he's going to ask this new girl to stay in the country forever, because he wants his son to walk into the future with her right by his side, making it clear he's planning a marriage. He says it's the only way to wash away their country's past sins and fix their future, while Arthur just stands there with a fake smile. As soon as the king finishes, Arthur's face drops. He thinks the whole plan is just completely ridiculous. Arthur sits alone, thinking about how a saint is really just a normal person who happens to have powers. He doesn't get why a king should have to fear someone like that or even beg for her help, and it bugs him that his father is still obsessed with some punishment or curse from 80 years ago. He thinks other nations are pretty pathetic, but seeing his own king and people lose their backbone is what he can't stand. To him, that spineless attitude is the only real curse, because worshipping one person that much is a guaranteed way to make a whole country fall apart. He believes that if she's human, she should follow human rules and stay in her lane, which to him means respecting bloodlines and rank, since everything works out fine as long as people like her are kept under total control. Arthur is disgusted that a woman with no home who just wanders around gets treated like royalty. He hates that she's wiggled her way into the royal court just by using the saint title. And now, just because his father said so, he's expected to hold her hand and play the part of a loving husband, but looking at the situation, He thinks the whole idea is just one big stupid joke. Meanwhile, word is spreading through the city, and people are starting to freak out over the news that a saint has finally been found. Arthur meets with an informant in a dark room to get the latest scoop. The guy tells him it's not official yet, but he saw it himself. A girl named Marielle was just moved from an orphanage into a count's house. The informant explains that the high priest and a few chosen people are going to check up on her and run a bunch of tests, all while mentioning that she was actually born a noble before she lost her parents. Arthur listens closely as he tells the guy he understands the situation, but gives him a stern warning to make sure not a single word of this leaks out to anyone else. He stands by the candlelight and orders the man to report every single detail back to him, because looking at the news, Arthur's eyes go completely wild. He thinks to himself that this is basically a gift from above. Standing by the window with his arms wide, he feels like he's finally free from his father's stupid plans. He's got a saint who's actually a noble, and even though he knows he has to be careful with the unknowns, he's ready to rewrite the whole story his own way. He wants everything running on his script, clenching his fist as he decides he'll be the one to give the people hope. The plan is set as soon as they're sure Marielle's power is the real deal. They're making their move. Arthur stands by the window, giving orders to his people to start spreading rumors. He wants them to be ready to cause a scene when the time is right, telling them to show no mercy and make it as dramatic as possible to get everyone riled up. Later on, he puts on a massive act in front of his knights. He looks all torn up while talking about Lady Myra, pretending like he doesn't want to believe the rumors because he still trusts her. But he keeps the lie going by saying that pushing her out is actually for her own good. He claims he just wants her to understand what she did wrong and change her ways, almost like he's doing her a favor. He looks down at his hand with this fake sad face, saying he truly believes this is the best path for her sake, and the knights totally fall for it. They look at him with a lot of respect, thinking he's being a noble leader while he's actually just playing them. Behind the scenes, his real plan is much darker. He wants to spread enough doubt that exiling Myra feels like the only natural move, and he even hopes she snaps because that would make things even easier. He knows that once things get messy, she'll lose her standing in the kingdom pretty fast. Plus, she's basically got no real support anyway, since the only person on her side is that one maid she brought with her. To him, there's zero political risk involved. His father, the king, is stuck in bed coughing his lungs out and looking worse by the day, meaning Arthur is basically running the show now. He's confident the Chancellor won't get in his way since they've known each other since he was a kid, and he knows his time to take the throne is right around the corner. With the government and the knights under his thumb, he starts turning his attention toward his plans for the temple. Arthur breaks the news that they've finally confirmed it for sure. A real saint has been born in the kingdom, the first time that's happened in 80 years. The high priest is thrilled, saying the whole kingdom is going to celebrate, but Arthur just smiles and agrees that it's wonderful, though he quickly switches gears to something way more dark. He points right at the priest and tells him to testify that Myra was a fake. He wants her labeled a criminal, claiming she just used Marielle to trick the entire kingdom. The priest is shaking, saying there's no way he can do that, so Arthur doesn't even hesitate. He starts yelling for the guards, making a scene and claiming the high priest has totally lost it, demanding they take him away right now. The priest is in shock as the guards move in, asking what they're doing, shouting that the king himself was the one who gave him his position, and that Arthur doesn't have the right. Arthur just looks at him like he's nothing, reminding the guy that he's the acting king, meaning his word is law now. And as the guards drag him out, Arthur smiles and tells him not to even worry about who's taking his job. Arthur introduces the new replacement, mentioning that even though the guy is lower ranked, he comes from a solid noble family, promising his work won't let the title down. He tells the guards he's not letting the former priest's freakout ruin the mood, so he orders them to throw the old man in a hole where he'll never be heard from again, staying there until he decides otherwise. The old high priest just hangs his head, completely broken as he whispers a prayer to the true king of the land, while Arthur's head is spinning with the fact that every single thing he's ever wanted is finally within his reach. He figures that once the public hears they were lied to by a fake saint, they'll be furious, making everyone feel sorry for him and Marielle. He sees it as a beautiful story where the people will look at them as symbols of hope, swearing total loyalty to him as their new king. He's already planning to get rid of anyone else who gets in his way, deciding that he's the only one who gets to call the shots from now on. Marielle just looks at him like he's a hero, but deep down, Arthur is only thinking about how this kingdom and everything in it belongs to him and him alone. It's been 3 days since Myra was kicked out of the kingdom. Arthur goes storming into the temple, ignoring the nuns who are desperately trying to get him to wait a second. He finds Marielle getting pampered by a whole team of servants, and she just gives him a big smile like everything is totally normal. Arthur is absolutely fuming. He yells at her, asking what the hell she's doing since it's already been 3 days since she took over. Marielle just holds up her cup and casually says they're having a tea party. But she doesn't stop there. She tells him they're having a nap party later and asks if he wants in, though he shuts that down fast. He starts going off on her for ignoring her teachers and the public, accusing her of just hiding out to play dress-up and eat all day, shouting about how she's hired way too many people, including a private chef and even a literal court jester to keep her entertained. He spots a random guy and asks who he is. Turns out he's a home coordinator Marielle hired to remodel the temple, which makes Arthur lose it even more. One of the priests tries to back her up, while Marielle just asks if hanging out with everyone at the temple isn't supposed to be part of the job. Marielle explains to the guys that she's actually been busy talking and teaching the staff a ton of things, listing off personal secrets like how one priest named Abnese will do basically anything if you just rub his chin. She even lets slip that another guy named Ease likes getting his butt smacked hard, leaving him on the floor in total shock. Arthur rubs his eyes like he's getting a headache, telling her that her only job is to make the public feel safe, reminding her that she needs to show her face to the people and actually learn some manners for once. Marielle just claps her hands and says it's no big deal, since she and the temple staff already worked out a special greeting. She heads out to a balcony to wave at a huge crowd, thanking everyone for coming while the kids yell out to her. She strikes a peace sign pose and introduces herself as the kingdom's new saint, and the crowd just casually greets her back. But Arthur is not having it at all, pointing a finger and threatening to slap her if she keeps squealing like that. He walks away through the temple halls, complaining to himself that the whole act is way too cutesy and the plan is already falling apart. Arthur walks through the halls, venting about how he exiled Myra and set the stage with a perfect speech, but now things are a mess. The high priest adds that the crowd was so hyped up that people were literally passing out, but Arthur's worried that all that momentum is about to die. The high priest thinks this might just be some weird backlash from her life at the orphanage, especially since he heard she was spoiled at the Irano estate. He suggests they just lie to the public and say she's resting and trying to get used to everything, but Arthur isn't buying it, complaining that she doesn't have any of the class or refinement you'd expect from a noble. He wonders how anyone even turns out like that, admitting that even the false saint Myra had way more dignity than her. He turns his frustration on the high priest, asking what the hell he's been doing this whole time. He reminds the guy that he was given his high status for one reason: to keep the temple staff in line and make sure everything runs smoothly, so he needs to step up and make sure Marielle doesn't just run wild. The high priest tries to apologize, explaining that he was way too busy just trying to get the priests to actually do their jobs. He points out that Marielle is nothing like Myra, and before he knew it, she had the entire staff wrapped around her finger. Apparently half the temple was sold on her the moment she showed up, and by the next day she was running the whole show. Arthur can't believe it, asking how she even managed to take control of all their weird personal kinks, and he starts wondering what kind of crazy stuff they're teaching saints at that orphanage. He loses his cool and yells for the chancellor to get down there and run an unannounced inspection on the place immediately. The chancellor salutes and gives a loud, enthusiastic "aka" in response, which Arthur thinks is a pretty solid answer. Arthur decides he's done wasting time now that he knows what he's dealing with. He plans to have tutors hovering over Marielle every second of the day to fix her behavior, right down to her sleep talking. The high priest stops Arthur to let him know there's one more huge problem involving Marielle, and it turns out there are monsters starting to swarm all around the capital. They're just hanging out right outside the walls, almost like they're waiting for everyone inside to get exhausted so they can strike, which has all the local adventurers and merchants too freaked out to even leave the city anymore. Arthur isn't impressed though, saying he already heard the news and stepped up the patrols since monsters showing up is nothing new. He gets a serious look on his face and brings up the status of the barrier, and the high priest explains that things shifted because Myra took the barrier down when she was exiled, but her magic was so strong that the leftovers are still keeping the monsters back for now. He admits that since he and the other priests don't have those kinds of powers, they're basically just guessing based on history, which makes Arthur lose his patience and call the guy useless. He asks how much longer those leftover traces of power are actually going to last, so the high priest gives him the bad news, saying they've only got about 10 days left at the most. Arthur lays out the plan, saying that within the next week, Marielle has to prove she can handle the monsters, basically taking over Myra's old job. He stares off, thinking he's really going to have to light a fire under her to get anything done. Inside the temple, Marielle starts losing it, complaining about how creepy the place is with all the old paintings, not to mention the flowers aren't even cute. Arthur isn't having any of it though, telling her to shut up because the prayer hall is her workplace now. He barks at her to just sit down and get to work, making her cry about how mean and harsh he's being, and then the high priest jumps in, telling her they need a barrier put up immediately. She's totally caught off guard by the sudden pressure. Arthur kicks the priests out, saying she needs zero distractions to focus. Marielle just lets out a disappointed groan while Arthur claps his hands and says this is the best deal she's getting. She just needs to start by putting a barrier over the temple. He doesn't give her a second to breathe, yelling at her to just do it already, but then his tone completely flips. He tells her to be happy because he brought her slippers, a cushion, and even her favorite stuffed toy, before realizing he accidentally grabbed his own toy instead. Marielle tries to argue back, saying she already promised a tea party, but Arthur isn't having it, asking how many times a day she plans on slacking off before telling her to just cancel it and do her job. She keeps going, mentioning there are people who literally can't sleep unless she whispers to them up close, though Arthur just shuts her down, saying he'll handle it and that she needs to get moving. She finally stands there with her hands together, trying to look the part while everyone waits to see what she can actually do. She just gives this really awkward, shaky smile while sweating under the pressure, and then she finally asks how she's even supposed to make a barrier from right there, leaving Arthur and the priest totally speechless. Outside in the city, word about the new Saint Marielle is already starting to spread, but the locals aren't happy, with one woman complaining that she just went straight into the temple without even saying hello. The guy next to her agrees, sounding pretty annoyed that he hasn't even seen her face yet. It's only been 3 days since everything changed, and the people in the palace are already making excuses for Marielle, thinking she's just wiped out because of all the drama the fake saint caused. Back at practice, things are getting pretty heated as the high priest asks how she could possibly not know how to use her own strength, while Arthur just keeps yelling at her to focus and visualize it. She finally manages to get a tiny spark to show up, which actually surprises her enough to shout that it finally came out. But Arthur isn't letting her rest for a second, barking orders for her to keep going and start the 7th attempt while she struggles just to hold it together. The high priest is just standing there looking completely over it while holding a stuffed animal, and they call out for her to try making the barrier for the 8th time. Marielle is sweating and groaning under the pressure. It's taking everything she has just to keep the magic from blowing up. When she starts to complain, Arthur doesn't want to hear it and tells her she needs to stop saying she can't do it so easily. She tries to explain that it's just not working out, mostly because the moment she tries to make the barrier any bigger, the whole thing just crumbles, leaving Arthur thinking back to the actual saint as he saw before, remembering how Lady Myra covered the entire capital just by putting her hands together. Marielle completely loses it when she hears that, yelling that there's no way anyone could do that since even a tiny barrier takes all her focus, so she's convinced it's literally impossible. Arthur looks her dead in the eye and tells her those are some pretty bold words for a girl who can barely even form a barrier, let alone hold it together. He realizes that expecting her to pull off the same crazy stuff Myra did is a stretch since she just awakened, so he pulls out some talismans and asks if she can handle this instead. He mentions the saint from 80 years ago did it easily, and even though these charms aren't as tough as a real barrier, they're great because they make her blessing something people can actually carry around. Arthur's got this smug look while explaining how everyone will see them and finally feel her grace, but Marielle just stands there looking completely tiny and overwhelmed. She doesn't even try to sugarcoat it and tells him straight up that she just can't do it because she honestly doesn't think she's cut out for this kind of pressure. She's sweating bullets while admitting she has no idea how to pull her power out the right way, which absolutely sets Arthur off. He gets right in her face with this terrifying look, asking her what the hell she's actually good for if she can't even handle the basics, since as far as he can tell, her only real talent is glowing on and off like a broken lamp. Marielle looks like she's about to cry while he just stands there in the shadows, letting out a long sigh. He tells her that if she keeps this up, people are going to start questioning if she's even a real saint at all, making Marielle completely freak out. She starts shouting that she's definitely the one, reminding him that the high priests checked her over and over before giving her the official okay. Marielle keeps panicking and stammers that she really can't use her power the right way, so Arthur asks if she actually lied to the priests. He tells her she fooled everyone just to laze around and warns her it won't end lightly at all. He describes this nightmare scenario where she rots in a cell with cold floors and iron bars until she dies. Marielle absolutely loses it and starts screaming at the top of her lungs that he's got it all wrong. She's a total mess, crying about how the priest specifically told her that her healing power was amazing and belonged to a real saint. Arthur stops to think about the healing part while Marielle just keeps wailing that she doesn't want to go to prison. Arthur finally softens up a bit, patting her head and telling her to calm down since jail is only for fakes. He kneels down to wipe her tears, reminding her that everyone knows the legends of how the previous saint was weak and miserable. He gets this little smirk on his face and offers to let her in on the real secret of why that happened. He looks her right in the eye and says it's simply because that girl didn't try hard enough. Arthur pinches the bridge of his nose, explaining that humans are supposed to grow and that people in the past just gave up, leaving that failure behind like a debt. He tells Marielle that everything starts like this and you have to polish yourself with constant effort. He says if she does, the country will thrive and everyone will love her, making Marielle ask if she can just grow flowers and eat snacks all day. She asks if her boring orphanage life is finally over, and Arthur tells her that she belongs here now. He gets serious and says she has 7 days to make a barrier over the whole castle, so she needs to follow his lead. He gives her a smile and says she can even keep doing her good morning routine, but then his tone shifts. He tells her she better give this everything she's got because if she fails, she has no future left. He grabs her hands and says they're starting right now, including a bunch of etiquette lessons that leave Marielle looking completely drained. She can't believe her luck and just thinks he's gotta be kidding her with all this extra work. Later, the Chancellor stands by while Arthur rests, wondering how they'll justify sending troops out for monsters. The Chancellor interrupts Arthur's rest to announce that Count Yahello is asking for a sudden meeting, which makes Arthur sigh, wondering why it's just one thing after another today. But then he changes his mind and tells the Chancellor to let him in, thinking this visit might actually be useful. While he waits, Arthur admits to himself that he's never really liked the guy and has a bad feeling about how the Count found Marielle right when the priest started looking, probably just chasing fame. As Yahello enters and bows, Arthur figures the guy is just here early to avoid any scandal. He doesn't hold back and tells the Count to keep it short since he's not in the mood for small talk. Yahello claims he only came by to see if Marielle is actually fit to protect the land, while fake crying into a handkerchief, apologizing for wasting the prince's time with his personal worries. Arthur just watches the performance and sighs, noting that the guy is Marielle's kin after all. Arthur leans his head on his hand, looking totally drained, and tells the Count that between them, Marielle isn't doing great because she claims her powers are being blocked, so he asks what they should do. Yahello is caught off guard by how blunt the prince is being and says he's way too honest for a private chat. He quickly switches gears and tells Arthur there is only one real answer. He starts blaming Myra for everything, calling her a wretch and saying she definitely put a curse on the girl. He asks for permission to take his private army across the border to hunt her down. Arthur agrees to let him use the troops but warns him to keep the whole operation a secret from the public. He tells Yahello not to be extra mean to Myra, since being cruel is just totally unnecessary. Even though he's acting concerned, Arthur thinks the Count showed up at the perfect time. A few days pass, and some guy in the middle of town starts losing his mind and screaming. Arthur checks his device and asks Eze how Marielle is holding up. Eze reports she stopped acting spoiled and spends all her time in the prayer hall mumbling weird spells. Arthur just smiles to himself, thinking about how well his little threat worked out. He figures if they keep the pressure on, she'll eventually produce something useful. And for now, as long as the people think a saint exists, that's fine, because Myra is his real target. There were actually 3 big reasons for kicking Myra out: making people forget her, blaming her for everything, and completely breaking her spirit. Pretty soon, new rumors start hitting the streets, and since there are more monsters and Marielle is missing, everyone starts blaming it on Myra's curse. Arthur is loving it, noting how Yahello spread the lies perfectly so Myra has nowhere left to hide, leaving everyone thinking Yahello and Marielle are the villains, while Arthur just plays the victim. Arthur stares out the window, thinking about how he'll cast Myra out and drag her back once she's hated, calculating that a broken Myra will be easy to control, forcing her to do all the dirty work in the shadows. He laughs at the idea of Marielle being the public face of the country, planning to work Marielle to the bone with fake promises of redemption while using her as a simple decoration. Everything is moving exactly according to his script, and he just wants all these fools to dance for him. The mood shifts as an instructor arrives, letting him know it's finally time to begin Marielle's training. Arthur tells her that Marielle doesn't need to be perfect, she just can't mess up when people are watching. He points out that this should be easy for the woman since she was the one who trained Myra, but the instructor just looks down, telling the prince that he's definitely overestimating her skills. She mentions something about Princess Myra of Idas, and Arthur is just left standing there looking confused. Raul sits by the fire thinking about how a saint with a matching name and hair color is basically unheard of, reasoning that while it's weird for an imposter, it's even weirder for a real saint to hide who she is. But as long as she protects the country, there isn't much he can do. He admits to himself that he basically forgot all his doubts the second he saw her face, and Myra picks up on it, asking if he was really that certain about her from the very start. Raul mentions how strange it is that he didn't hear a single rumor about her in town, almost like he was the only one who noticed anything off, though he figures people just don't keep track of foreign royalty most of the time. Myra explains that she hardly ever went out in public even back home in Idas, so it makes sense why nobody in Royalis figured it out. And honestly, she's just glad they got out of town without anyone coming after them. Raul looks her in the eye and asks the big question, did Prince Arthur really have no idea who she actually was? Myra just looks down with a quiet expression, saying she guesses he really didn't know after all. Arthur realizes that even if Myra wanted to hide her identity, it was his father's request all along, and Myra can't help but wonder why the king would keep something that big from his own son. Arthur remembers how Myra didn't even need training because she just naturally acted like a saint, recalling how she was introduced as a traveler, though he actually asked her once if she was royalty. Back then, she just gave him a quiet smile and didn't really give him an answer at all. He admits that looking back, she definitely had that noble vibe from the very first day, but the conversation gets cut short when the Chancellor runs in yelling for Arthur to follow him. Arthur asks if Yahello finally brought Myra back, but the guards have to tell him no. And just then, a scout shouts that King Larid from Idas has shown up with his whole army. The Chancellor is losing it, while Arthur just stares out wondering what the hell the king wants. Arthur is pretty heated and tells the guards they should have reported to him first instead of acting alone, but the king steps in, explaining there's a standing agreement to let the King of Itas enter without question. Arthur's caught off guard since his father never mentioned this, and he notices the Chancellor is acting weird. Then Marielle comes rushing in because she heard the news, which just makes Arthur even more annoyed. She's acting all bubbly and cheerful like it's just a normal morning, throwing up a peace sign, talking about how the King of Idas comes from a scary place and apparently has 4 saints with him. Marielle claps her hands together, thinking this king might actually know the secret to powering up a saint, so she announces she's going to listen in on the meeting because she's determined to learn. Arthur just glares at her, calling her a carefree idiot and saying she's making his job harder, admitting her spirit is fine, even if they probably won't have time for her games. Arthur considers the situation, thinking that promoting Marielle for the future might not be such a bad idea, so he gives her special permission to sit in, but warns her not to embarrass him or say anything unnecessary, telling her to just watch and only speak after he does. Arthur points a finger to make sure she's listening, and Marielle just gives him a cheerful okie dokie. Then she follows up by asking what the word embarrass even means, which makes the Chancellor call her an idiot. The Chancellor announces the prince's arrival as they reach the meeting room, but Arthur is stuck in his head, thinking about how Marielle's presence has pushed his whole plan into its final stage. He rubs his eyes in frustration, wondering why everything lately keeps going completely off script, and as he walks in with the Chancellor, he realizes something has been bothering him ever since they got there. He looks toward the people waiting for him, unable to shake this heavy, bad feeling in his gut, until King Larid looks right at him with a big smile and welcomes him into the room. King Larid starts things off by saying he wants to give a quick greeting, even if everyone already knows who he is. He introduces himself as the King of Idas, and Arthur keeps it polite by saying it's an honor to finally meet him. Arthur recognizes the name immediately. This is the famous Silver Lion he's heard so much about. He remembers the stories of how Larid took over the throne as a kid after his father was killed in a massive war, and how the guy became a legend for fighting on the front lines, earning his nickname from his bravery and that bright silver hair. Arthur introduces himself as the first Prince of Royalis, explaining that he's there representing the kingdom since his father is currently stuck in bed. But he can't help thinking the guy doesn't look like much of a lion, wondering if that skinny body can even swing a sword properly. Larid keeps things casual, saying they're all neighbors and shouldn't act like strangers, then tells Marielle she can relax a bit, which completely catches her off guard, leaving her stuttering and tripping over her words as she tries to be respectful. She's left standing there in total shock, unable to believe the King of Itas actually knew her name. Larid starts by clearing the air, explaining that the armor he's wearing is just a basic precaution for his own safety while traveling. He mentions that his main army is actually parked outside the capital, and he only brought a few of his best guys inside with him. He says he didn't mean to intimidate anyone and feels bad about scaring the people, but Arthur tells him it's fine. The prince even apologizes for not having a proper welcome ready, all while thinking about how the border guards never sent word. Larid adds that they had a little scrap with some monsters near the capital and asks if Arthur will sign off on them using force on his land. Arthur plays it off smooth, saying they should probably be thanking him for cleaning up the local monster problem. He wonders if this old agreement really gives the king this much freedom, but Larid just laughs and says the prince catches on quick. Arthur can't believe something this big never reached his ears, but before he can dwell on it, Larid says it's time for business, revealing that he actually came all this way because he's looking for 2 specific things in the kingdom. Arthur is pretty surprised by that, asking the king what exactly he's trying to find. Larid says the answer is actually pretty simple. He just wants Arthur to lend him some troops and let them do their thing within the borders. Arthur is surprised, asking if he really came all this way just for that, but Laroid shifts the topic, asking how Arthur's father is doing lately. Arthur looks a bit tense at the question, and explains that the king has been stuck in bed for about a year now. Laroid says he was worried about him, especially since their kingdoms have such a long history and friendship together, making Arthur try to steer the conversation back to the actual point. He tells Laroid they appreciate the concern, but he needs to get to the real reason he's here while Marielle watches them from the side. Arthur decides to just lay it out there. He looks the king in the eye and says he's going to be blunt about how things are running in the kingdom, and mentions that their medicine is top-notch, so the king's condition is stable for now. As for the king not being around to lead, Arthur says that he's got it handled as the first prince, along with help from the saint. He brings up a huge choice his father made about a year ago, which revolved around the decision to finally bring a saint into the country. He goes on to explain that the official story was that her job was to travel and heal the land, but by keeping her only in Raidaras, they were able to stop taking aid from other nations, something they hadn't been able to do for 80 years. He lists off all the wins from the last year. Food supplies are up, monster attacks are down, and the economy is doing great. Marielle just stands there looking completely confused by all the politics. Arthur adds that their progress covers everything, including better medical care for the people. King Laroid admits the trade-off was worth it since the gains beat out any lost aid. He says even with monsters out there, they can travel with almost no gear thanks to the saint, which makes Arthur nod along. After a brief, quiet moment, he tells the king he's exactly right and gestures toward the girl next to him. He says this is all thanks to the power of Marielle, who's standing right here, while Marielle just stands there with a blank look, not following the political talk at all. Laroid brings up how much the king of Royalis struggled with his conscience. He says the king felt like he was just exploiting the saint like the rulers of the past, and reveals that the king honestly thought he was the one who deserved to be cursed instead, leading Arthur to get pretty worked up internally. He thinks his father is acting like a spineless fool for saying that stuff to another king, calling the whole situation a total embarrassment. He stares ahead, wondering what his father was even trying to achieve. To him, the talk is just going nowhere, and he's clearly annoyed that his father made these choices and showed so much weakness without ever talking to him about it first. Arthur tells himself to hold on a second. He can't figure out why his father would talk to Laroid or when he even had the chance. It turns out any talk had to happen before the king got sick and ended up stuck in bed. It was all part of a secret deal between the two rulers. Arthur wonders why they'd let a foreign king in with no strings attached. He wants to know what they got back in exchange for the saint who showed up. The word is that Ida's actually has 4 saints, the Queen Mother and her 3 princesses, and as the names are listed off, Arthur notices how much grace Myra has. He sees her silver hair and realizes it's the exact same color as Laroid's, making him stop in his tracks. He's sweating now and completely stunned. He tries to tell himself to stay calm because there's no way it's true. He's desperate to believe she's just some random wandering saint. So he yells that this has nothing to do with anything. Meanwhile, Laroid just gives a little smile like everything is going exactly as planned. Laroid calls Arthur out for being so fond of schemes. He tells the prince he's pretty sharp for catching on so fast. Myra looks up with a bright expression. She simply says that he's right. Myra starts gushing about how amazing Arthur is. Meanwhile, the prince looks like he's seeing his life flash before his eyes. She keeps going, telling everyone he's always thinking about the kingdom. Arthur glances back at Laroid, who's just standing there acting all smug. She claims the citizens all love him and want to help because the country is so happy, but Arthur is sweating bullets, looking like he's about to snap. Then Myra turns up the heat, shouting that the fake saint is just getting in the way. She tells the prince to watch her and just repeat what she says, but Arthur is panicking, wishing she would just shut up and follow his lead instead. Laroid catches on to the fake saint comment. He repeats the words and asks what kind of person this girl really was. Arthur is basically begging her to stop and not say another word, but Myra is already getting ready to spill everything. She starts counting off on her fingers, calling the girl a dumb imposter who showed off her silver hair. She says she was just a liar who loved tricking people. Myra doesn't hold back, calling her a good-for-nothing who stole things that weren't hers. She finishes her rant by calling her a pathetic nobody who got kicked out for her schemes. Apparently, she was even luring monsters in with curses. Myra is on a roll, shouting that the fake saint is even the reason her own powers are weak. She's really digging a hole while Arthur is internally losing it, wishing she'd shut up because he's too scared to move. Laroid just watches, sounding pretty curious about the whole thing. Myra keeps going, saying the girl betrayed the prince and makes everyone miserable. Then she gets even louder, calling the fake Myra a total criminal and a piece of trash. Arthur looks like he's about to faint, and suddenly the whole room goes dead quiet as they stand in front of the king. Laroid leans back in his chair and stares them down, asking what the problem is. Myra is so terrified that her knees buckle and hit the floor with a thud, but the king just tells her to keep talking. He turns his focus to the prince. Saying his name, Arthur looks like he can barely breathe, let alone answer back. Laroid smiles and says he wants to hear more, specifically asking what this fake saint looked like. Arthur is sweating bullets, barely managing to choke out that the girl had silver hair. Laroid leans in, asking if the girl really looked like some vile woman who spent her time plotting stupid schemes to ruin people. Arthur is sweating bullets and barely manages to stammer out that he didn't see her that way. The pressure is so heavy that Arthur actually thinks he's about to be killed right then and there. Laroid asks what he means by different and reminds Arthur that he's the very person who signed the exile decree. He just stares him down, calling him out specifically as Arthur, the acting king. Moving on, Laroid mentions how their talk about missing persons got interrupted earlier and wants to get back to it. He explains that a year ago she came to this kingdom at the king's request with her identity completely hidden. She spent that whole time serving everyone as a saint. But things changed fast because right after her engagement to the prince was set in stone, she was suddenly called a fake and thrown out of the country. Laroid clenches his fist, finally revealing the real reason he's there. He's searching for his younger sister, Myra. Laroid asks the two of them if they know anything about what's going on. Marielle is completely frozen, and Arthur looks like he's about to lose it. Arthur is sweating like crazy and clutching his neck. He's internally screaming at himself to think of any possible way to get out of this alive. His mind is racing as he tries to convince himself he's innocent. He decides he's got to shift the blame to someone else, no matter what. He keeps telling himself it wasn't his fault since he didn't know anything. He just needs a scapegoat to take the fall for him, and fast. The pressure finally breaks him. He starts stammering out a name. He shouts that Count Yahello is the one behind everything, saying the guy is still out there trashing Myra's reputation across the whole kingdom. Arthur is basically having a meltdown, screaming that they were all just pawns in Yahello's game. He claims they were used to do something they can't ever take back. With a look of pure desperation on his face, he doubles down, yelling at the top of his lungs that it all started with the Count. A memory shows Yahello sitting there looking smug, telling his followers to wait for the right moment to all start shouting at once without any mercy. Yahello plays it off like he's doing Myra a favor, saying she needs to realize she has no place there, so she can finally understand her sins and change. Laroid just taps his finger on the chair, repeating Arthur's words back to him like he's thinking it over. The phrase "for her own good" really doesn't seem to sit right with him. Everything goes sideways. Arthur loses his cool and lets out a massive scream as the people around them watch the whole breakdown happen. Laroid calls him a devoted follower, pointing out how the guy remembers every single word Count Yahello said. Arthur just stands there with his mouth open, looking like he's seen a ghost. Laroid keeps going, telling Arthur that he only followed along because he actually thought he was doing the right thing, which only makes things worse. Laroid mentions that Arthur's father made a pretty bad choice, but at least the man was ready to take the fall for everything he did. Starting to walk away, Laroid says he isn't the type to just keep picking on a guy's mistakes, but since he respected Arthur's father, he's got one last thing to say. He looks back with a cold stare and tells Arthur flat out that he's just not cut out for this. The guy's caliber is nowhere near where it needs to be, leaving Marielle looking totally shocked. Laroid adds one more point, explaining that when a new saint shows up in a place where that bloodline hasn't been seen in forever, they won't actually have the strength to deal with miasma until a few generations later. Marielle just stands there crying, realizing how much pressure is on her. Laroid tells the group to take care of Marielle before heading out. He finishes by saying a formal decision about their fate will be delivered some other time. The Chancellor and the High Priest look totally caught off guard as they see the king getting ready to head out. The Chancellor asks if he's really leaving this soon, but Arthur is basically vibrating with nerves. Looking down at the floor and sweating as he tries to salvage the situation, he weakly suggests they could throw a whole welcome party for the king if he stays, yet Laroid doesn't even turn his head, looking back with a glance that's colder than ice. He tells them there's no need because he's done here, leaving Arthur face down on the rug in a desperate grovel while the king just walks out on them. In just a matter of days, the barrier Myra put up is going to run out of juice completely, and once that happens, monsters are going to hit the capital like a wave. The soldiers forced to deal with the mess are just going to get ground down by the constant fighting. We can see the chaos starting as monsters tear through everything, and it won't be long before everyone starts asking the same question. They're going to wonder why their supposed saint, Marielle, isn't doing anything with her divine power to save them. The people are going to be begging to know why she won't even show her face. But it doesn't matter how much they pray, Marielle doesn't have what it takes to fix a disaster like this. Everything these people built over the last year, all their money and their homes, is just going to vanish. Their entire future is basically collapsing right in front of them, which means they're going to be totally worn out. Their trust in the government and the royal family is going to fade away until there's nothing left. The nation of Idas can't just sit back and watch a neighbor fall to monsters, but there's a catch: they aren't planning on helping out for free. The plan is simple. Once the land and the people are totally broken, Laroid is going to show up again. And he isn't coming alone, since he'll probably bring Myra with him to offer everyone salvation. At the same time, he's going to point fingers and name the person responsible for all this ruin, so the people's panic and despair will start to shift. Laroid's words are going to take all that distrust and turn it into pure rage, and Arthur knows exactly where that anger is going to be aimed. He realizes that the people are going to come for him, and he's falling apart, thinking about how none of this was supposed to happen. He regrets everything, thinking that if he actually knew who Myra was, he never would have pulled those stunts. It hits him that their positions have completely flipped from before. He's the one in trouble now, and the worst part is that he's totally stuck. He figures if he tells the truth, the people will riot, but if he keeps lying, he'll just make Laroid even angrier. He feels like a target. All he can do is shake and struggle until the fangs finally sink into his neck. Arthur is basically hiding in his room, clutching his head and feeling like a trapped rat. Even though he's standing right in the middle of his own castle, it feels like a prison he can't escape. Arthur wishes he could just wake up from this nightmare. Just this morning, he was laughing about how well things were going, and now that feels like a lifetime ago. He's so shaken he can't even remember walking back to his room, and the memory of the king's interrogation has him biting his nails. Just being near that guy makes him feel like he's standing on the edge of a cliff, so he knows once those monster attacks begin, his time is officially up. He starts spiraling, trying to find any possible way to put a stop to the disaster, but getting help from other countries is out of the question. Nobody is going to mess with Idas, and even if they did, they'd never show up fast enough to save him. He even thinks about taking out King Laroid to hide the evidence, but that's another dead end since it would just trigger a war and get everyone killed anyway. Suddenly, he stops and looks over at a teddy bear sitting on the bed. Something clicks in his head, and he starts thinking about Myra again. He figures the simplest move is to just stick to the original plan and track her down before Laroid can get to her. If he can force her to set up a barrier, he might even be able to use her to talk the king down. It turns out being backed into a corner really clears his head. He's not about to let himself get taken down without a fight, and as he grabs the stuffed animal, he decides he's going to make everyone else start scrambling to keep up with his new moves. Arthur tosses a teddy bear onto his bed, telling himself that everything in this room belongs to him. But his moment of control is interrupted when the high priest shows up with some advice. He tells Arthur he needs to go chase down King Laroid immediately and beg for mercy, explaining that if Arthur actually cares about the country, sacrificing himself to save the people is the only way to go. Arthur just stares at him, looking completely stressed out. He tells the guy he really has no idea what's actually happening, and then he snaps. He grabs the priest by the collar and yells that once he's through, everyone is going to find out how the priest helped exile Myra and kept Marielle around. He keeps shaking him, shouting about how the guy even schemed his way into the high priest position, but the priest just looks at him with this smug, sweaty face. He tells Arthur he's still missing the point, and that none of those secrets really matter. Arthur is stunned as the priest scoffs at his own title, asking what kind of authority a temple even has when they haven't seen a saint in 80 years. He starts ranting about how his brother got the family inheritance, leaving him stuck as a lowly priest instead of someone with real influence. He admits he only helped the prince so he could enjoy some perks, but he's pissed off that the whole plan blew up in less than 10 days. The high priest stands his ground, looking down at the mess while remarking how all of this is actually pretty fitting for a country like this, and he doesn't stop there. He tells Arthur that if the saint is useless, then the prince is just as bad since he's the type of guy who never bothers to check the facts, causing Marielle to look on in total shock. The priest keeps going, saying that even if she really was incompetent, it wouldn't change the fact that Arthur is the real idiot in the room. The priest screams that the prince is the one who sank the entire kingdom just to play at some behind-the-scenes conspiracy, which completely sets Arthur off. He shouts back that he actually had a plan that was working perfectly and tells the priest to stop blaming him for his own lazy investigating, but the priest just yells right back. He calls the prince a total fool who only thinks he's smart, and before long the two of them are screaming in each other's faces. Arthur loses it, yelling that the priest was really just a coward hiding behind him the whole time, leaving Marielle standing there feeling awkward. She tries to jump into the middle of the argument, stammering that she isn't actually useless, and then she pivots the conversation entirely. She tells a very confused-looking Arthur that she actually had something special she wanted to show him today, pulling out a star-shaped charm. She proudly shows it off, explaining how she worked her head off just to finally get one single charm finished. Marielle tries to defend herself, saying she did exactly what she was told and keeps insisting she really is a saint, but Arthur isn't having it. He shuts her down immediately, telling her she didn't actually do anything at all, and he stays angry. He snaps that she said something she shouldn't have and made things worse, asking who even told her to make that charm, leaving Marielle completely stunned. She repeats the words about the next generation, looking like her world is falling apart, while Arthur keeps yelling. He tells her if she can't put up a barrier right now, she's just a useless girl whose only value was her birth. But then the Chancellor speaks up with some news. He looks at his papers and says Marielle wasn't actually born into a noble family, and the details only get worse. He explains that based on orphanage records, she was taken in as a baby, not 10 years ago like they thought, which changes everything. The Chancellor says it looks like Count Yahello faked the whole story just to look good for finding a new saint, causing the priest to laugh. He says that finally explains why she's so uneducated and doesn't know what she's doing, but Marielle won't back down. She screams at them that none of what they're saying is true. Marielle starts losing it, screaming that Count Yahello was the one who told her everything, claiming she was his niece so he'd look after her, and telling her to just forget the orphanage since the prince would like her better as a noble. She turns on Arthur then, shouting that he said the exact same thing to her, breaking down, as she remembers the promise that if she just played along, she could live a perfect life in the palace forever. She's completely desperate now, begging them not to take away her title as a saint, but the high priest just watches, mocking her for having power without the status of a real noble. Arthur's had enough and tells her to shut up, but the priest keeps going, asking Arthur if it isn't typical for lowborns to struggle like this. Arthur snaps at him to be quiet too, but the guy doesn't stop dropping the real truth and saying the only reason Arthur acted like this was because he was actually terrified of Myra. He explains that Myra had a level of power the prince couldn't even understand, and since she wasn't even from their country, everything about her was completely out of his hands. Arthur tries to make him stop, but the priest just laughs, saying Arthur only came up with these twisted plans because he was too scared to try and control Myra any other way. Arthur's completely lost his cool, screaming at Marielle to shut her desperate mouth. He's towering over her, demanding to know who she thinks she's even talking to, but Marielle doesn't back down, calling out to the prince and reminding him she did everything he asked for. She's desperate, arguing that since she's a saint, she should be allowed to stay, which just makes Arthur snap even harder, yelling that she hasn't done a single thing right. He tells her she's just a useless nobody who isn't even a noble and needs to stay out of his business. Marielle just stands there looking completely crushed, barely able to get any words out as she tries to process what he's saying. She looks up at him with these wide, watery eyes and asks what he can actually do himself, telling him straight to his face that monsters aren't going to just go away because he decides to shout at them. The harsh truth hangs in the air that he's just not fit for any of this and doesn't have the caliber to lead, leaving Marielle sobbing, while Arthur stands there defeated, a far cry from the arrogant guy he used to be when this all started. He starts losing his mind, his eyes going all shaky as he accuses everyone of conspiring together. He's convinced the only reason any of this is happening is because people want to persecute him, and finally, he just loses it completely, screaming at the top of his lungs that this is treason and calling for the guards. Arthur's looking like a total mess, sweating and staring at the floor while he mutters about how everyone around him is just a bunch of twisted, selfish idiots. He's stuck in his own head, repeating over and over that he's not the one in the wrong here, but while he's losing it, the actual situation outside is turning into a nightmare, with monsters flooding the area so fast that the soldiers can't even keep up. The Chancellor tries to explain himself, saying he was only told to follow the prince's lead instead of the king's, and that he's basically in the dark about everything else, and he begs Arthur to at least listen to what the king had to say, but he barely gets the words out before Arthur just snaps at him to shut up. He doesn't want to hear it, and just barks an order for the Chancellor to focus on protecting him and nothing else. Suddenly, Arthur hears voices in his head comparing him to his younger brother and trash-talking his mother, making him spin around and demand to know who's talking. He's standing all alone in the hall, looking like a ghost as he yells back at the voices, telling them he can hear every word they're saying. Meanwhile, the people in the capital are starting to freak out. They're confused about why the King of Idas showed up, and they're asking if the saint is still too sick to help. The crowd is getting desperate because the kids are terrified of the monsters they can see right outside their windows, and everyone's just begging to hear anything from the prince. Everything feels like it's coming to a head as the idea that justice is finally in his hands starts taking over. But back in the palace, Arthur is a total wreck, clutching his head on a couch while voices yell for him to give orders because Myra is their only hope left. The shouting just keeps coming, with people begging him to do something quickly and bring help right now, but then, everything suddenly goes dead silent. Arthur's eyes go wide as he realizes the noise outside just stopped, and he can't believe how quiet it's gotten so fast. Later on, Arthur is sitting on the throne as someone introduces him as the King of Royalis, and a visitor says it's a huge honor to meet him. A woman with long dark hair stands before him, explaining that she heard the kingdom was in trouble while she was traveling north, so she hurried over to help. She bows deeply and tells him that she already took care of the entire monster horde, using her purification power to wipe every single one of them out. Arthur just stares at her, completely stunned because he thinks what she's saying is actually impossible. But he tries to keep his cool, stammering out that he appreciates it and offering thanks on behalf of the king since he's still technically the crown prince. The woman apologizes for being rude, mentioning she had only heard rumors that he was destined to be the one leading the whole nation. Arthur stares at her, his mind racing with thoughts of saints and mercy because he just can't believe she's actually standing there. The woman stays seated on the floor and apologizes for waiting so long to properly introduce herself. She smiles and explains that she is the wandering saint known as Irano, and she makes it clear right away that she isn't looking for any special status or honor for what she did. She continues by saying her only real joy is using the power she got from the heavens to serve the true king, even if it costs her life. Arthur looks like he just won the lottery, thinking to himself that his big break is finally here and that it must be a sign. He leans in and asks Irano if she'll stay at the palace to help his country with all that power she has. She gives him this really creepy smile and says she'll do whatever he tells her to, and just like that, Arthur's ego explodes, making him feel like he's finally proven he is actually fit to be the king. Looking closer at things though, someone mentions that this is exactly what a diseased piece of fruit looks like. Raul holds up some of the rotten fruit and explains that some creatures actually like the smell and taste of it. He says they even spread the blight on purpose, making Myra wonder if you can just cut out the gross parts and still eat the rest of the berry. Raul tells her it's better to just stay away from it because the poison spreads through the whole thing and makes it taste like garbage. Myra just looks at him and asks if he knows that because he actually tried eating it, but he just keeps working, telling her that the trick to harvesting is to always check the fruit from the top first. He admits he's impressed with how sharp her memory is, and Myra just smiles back, telling him she only knows this stuff because of him. As they walk, Myra notices the lingering scent of the barrier is finally starting to fade away, which makes her stop and wonder how Marielle is doing, but Raul cuts in, saying they should stop here for a second because he wants to get this finished before they go find an inn for the night. Myra tells him he better not wander off because the sun is going down and night is going to catch up to them soon. Later on, they find a shopkeeper who confirms their order and asks if they're looking for the dried berries, while Raul asks where the contract mage is. The guy tells him Jiri is out for a walk right now, but promises to have everything done by the morning. The shopkeeper takes their items and tells them that bringing their own ingredients really makes things easier, since his own stock is totally empty from everyone panic buying lately. He says the whole town is stressed out about the monsters and all the drama surrounding the fake saint, but some loud guy nearby notices Myra and shouts over to her, saying he's never seen her around here before while laughing in her face. Myra just stares back, completely baffled by how over-the-top the guy is acting. Moving on, Raul notes that they've been teaming up quite a bit lately and tells the shopkeeper he'll see him again tomorrow. As they walk through the town, Raul looks out at the view and remarks on how the lake water stays crystal clear even up close, explaining that this spot is a major hub where tons of travelers stop specifically to stock up on gear. They check their map, tracing the path from where Myra originally left Tool all the way up toward the border. Myra looks over the route and decides that after they rest and finish shopping, they should ditch the main road and head for the border through the mountain. Raul keeps walking and tells her to keep her eyes on the map while she listens to what he has to say. Raul explains that Diallo's men don't actually know their current situation. They probably won't try any big moves yet, but he also points out that they have no clue what those guys were doing while they were hiding in the forest. Myra asks if there's a chance they just gave up, and while Raul agrees that would be ideal, he warns they could still run into them. Since the streets aren't crowded enough to disappear into, he says their best bet is to just act like a couple of regular adventurers moving through town. Myra looks up from the map and asks if she can bring up that contract mage they met earlier. Raul says that plenty of mages sell their skills like a service. Some don't even bother with shops and just take random jobs as they come. Just then, Jiri shows up and greets Raul, who introduces her as a specialist in magic processing and food preservation. Jiri starts to lean in, telling Raul he's gotta hear about what's been going on lately. But Raul isn't really in the mood for talk and tells her she can just tell him everything at the shop tomorrow. Jiri gets a kick out of that. She notes it's a total first for her to see Raul actually traveling with a girl. Myra looks pretty stressed out, just quietly questioning if she even likes smoked food as things get awkward. Raul tries to get Jiri to back off by warning her that Myra accidentally blasts people with explosion magic when she's startled. So even though Jiri yells that she's coming with them, Raul tells Myra they should start jogging so they can lose her without looking weird. As they walk away, Myra wonders if having magic like that would mean they'd never have to worry about food again. But Raul keeps it real and tells her magic isn't some perfect fix. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses to deal with. He explains that using magic is actually way more exhausting than it looks from the outside, and tells her it's just a good thing to keep in mind for the future. Raul figures being a saint works the same way. It's a big deal, but that power isn't limitless and it will eventually run out. The bigger problem is that they still don't know how much Yahello's men actually know about Myra specifically, which is risky since they might recognize her face, and since her limits are still a mystery, Raul wonders how she'd handle getting swarmed. Myra calls out for Raul, knowing that no matter what comes their way, things are about to get heavy. She keeps her head down and focuses on the map while they keep moving. Raul looks ahead, promising he's going to protect her all the way until they reach the border. And once they finally get to the inn, Myra lets him know which room she'll be staying in. As they're about to head in, Myra stops him for a second, and with a small smile she just tells him good night before the door clicks shut. Myra flops onto the mattress, thinking about how it's been 5 whole days since she last slept in an actual bed. She starts wondering what the Count is really up to if he catches her, and there's no way he's trying to save her from Arthur, so she stares at the candle, wondering if this is all tied to the weird vibes back in the capital. Maybe the soldiers chasing her know the truth. Finally, she admits to herself she's being way too naive, because a fake saint would never get off with just being sent away. Myra sits there feeling guilty, thinking she should have just told Raul the truth from the start. She really regrets not backing out before things got this messy. She realizes Raul has actually been pretty nice to her lately, ever since he figured out she wasn't some dangerous criminal on the run. She starts to think about something else but stops herself. She knows there's no time to waste and they have to move fast. Someone tries to grab the doorknob and shake it, but it's completely stuck and won't move an inch. A memory of a woman in royal clothes flashes through her head. Hearing someone answer, "Yes, Mother," back when she was a kid sitting on her bed, she remembers trying to tell her mother about something she'd been thinking about. In the present, a man tells Raul that the fire was started from the outside, so Raul asks if he saw anything going on inside. The guy explains that the heat scorched the door shut. It's stuck so bad that it won't open no matter what. Raul tells him not to worry about it, deciding he's just going to go over and check the door out himself. The other guys stand around sniffing the air, complaining about the burnt smell and wondering if someone actually set the place on fire on purpose. Raul walks up to the room and calls out to Myra, letting her know he's coming in since the door is wide open, and he rushes inside and sees her lying still on the bed, immediately panicking and wondering if Yahello's people managed to find her. Raul looks totally horrified as he stares at her. He's sweating and desperately trying to convince himself she's just taking a nap, so Myra finally starts to stir, looking up at him all sleepy-eyed and asking if it's morning time already. Raul is so relieved he just flops down into a nearby chair. The guy is completely wiped out from the scare. He closes his eyes and lets out a long breath, smiling to himself because he's just so happy she's safe and sound, and once he catches his breath, he asks if she messed with the barrier, and she explains she set the mana to only let him through while blocking everyone else. She goes on to tell him that she made sure to put those special barriers on both of their room doors to keep them safe, while Myra sits there and explains that even if someone busts the lock, nobody is getting in unless one of them actually touches the door first, so Raul realizes they were the keys to the rooms the whole time, rubbing his face and feeling a bit exhausted by the whole situation. Raul rubs his face, feeling the exhaustion hit him as he admits Myra's magic is way more flexible than he thought. He finally gets why she was so chill about her cover story before. He looks up at her, realizing the extent of her protection, and asks if she put one of those barriers on his door as well. Myra looks down with a small, shy smile, explaining that she really just wanted him to be able to sleep a little easier tonight. She looks a bit guilty though, admitting she forgot to tell the one person who actually mattered. She apologizes for being so careless and just making him more confused. Raul looks at her with a soft expression, his panic totally gone now as he tells her it's fine, as long as she's safe. Moving on, Raul starts thinking it over and realizes there are just way too many weird things about tonight for this to be Yahello's group. He notes that if those guys were actually trying to kidnap her, they were way too loud and did a pretty sloppy job of it. The guy thinks it through, saying that while random looting doesn't really fit either, someone was definitely looking for her. He looks over at her with a serious face, mentioning that he's pretty sure the intruders made it all the way to her room. Raul tells her to grab her things and get ready so they can leave town before anyone can follow, but Myra stops him, sounding like she's got something else to say. Myra looks closely at the damage, saying it's finally clear who the culprit is because she can see mana traces left inside the keyhole, confirming the person who broke in was a mage. She points out the burn marks on the wood where they tried to use heat to force it open, leaving Raul completely surprised that she can figure all that out just by looking at the lock. He starts putting the pieces together about the mage, while Myra explains she can actually track them, saying it's as easy for her as pulling on a thread. She tells him they should go catch them right now before they have to head out of town, and gets a really determined look on her face, insisting those guys are going to pay for the door they wrecked. Raul just smiles and agrees, joking that a repair bill like that definitely isn't covered by his protection fee. He thinks back to when she told him magic wasn't all-powerful, which seems pretty wild now. Raul starts wondering if saints are just the exception to that rule, or if there's something else he doesn't know yet. Some hooded guys are standing around when one of them notices a weird smell. His buddy says it's just from a small fire some drunk guy started at the inn, but the leader isn't buying it and thinks something is definitely off. He tells his guys to check everyone coming out of that inn just in case. Outside the city, a kid points toward the mountains and shouts about seeing a massive bird in the sky, but his mom just laughs and tries to give him a lesson on perspective, saying things far away just look small. She tells him the mountain only looks tiny because it's distant. The kid isn't convinced and points out the bird is actually flying right over a house nearby, making the mom realize he might actually be right. It turns out it's not a bird at all, but a giant monster-like creature. If that thing was actually by the mountain, it would be as big as the peak itself. Back with Myra, she's questioning if they even need to hire an escort for their journey, since she's confident her barrier magic can keep them safe and let them rest comfortably, and she figures a carriage would get them to Ida's pretty quickly anyway. Tool speaks up though, reminding her that she doesn't have any actual experience in a real fight, and points out that Myra wouldn't be able to handle a surprise attack, especially since Prince Arthur shoved her around so easily, and Tool isn't strong enough to help much either. Tool explains that the limits of Myra's power are still a mystery. It's not like the steady barrier back in the capital, so using it constantly would take a massive physical toll that they just can't predict. She adds that relying on a normal carriage is too risky because if they get jumped, there's no way to run and they aren't safe or fast enough anyway. So Myra leans against a tree, looking pretty down as she thanks Tool. She tells her she feels bad for dragging her into all this trouble. Tool isn't having it though, saying that if the people hadn't acted so crazy to begin with, Myra wouldn't have to deal with any of this. She thinks the people are just being ungrateful after everything Myra did. Myra just looks back at her and says that sitting around blaming the citizens isn't going to help their situation. And then the scene shifts to Raul finally tracking someone down. He tells the person he found them and suggests they just come along quietly. But it turns out to be a woman named Jiri with sharp teeth and a big hat who acts all playful, asking Raul if he actually came all this way just to see her. Raul isn't in the mood for games and tells her to cut it out. He makes it clear that she isn't going to play dumb and get away with it this time. He tells her that whatever she was thinking, starting a fire was way over the line. He claims there's no point in her running because he can just track her by her mana residue, which makes Jiri burst out laughing as she calls him out for bluffing. She leans back against the wall and reminds him that even she can't see mana traces, so there's no way he can either. Raul keeps the pressure on Jiri, telling her he's got to open his shop soon anyway. He points out that after using enough heat to melt a metal doorknob, she's probably totally drained, so she isn't going to be able to work and should probably just take a rest. Jiri tries to play it off by acting all scared, but a sudden thud cuts her off and then she realizes she's trapped. She reaches out and hits something solid, asking in total shock if there's a wall blocking her path, which is when Myra steps up, holding a glowing point of light at her fingertip. She tells Jiri that if she needs more proof of what she can do, she's got plenty to show her. Myra looks her straight in the eye, dropping the tough act for a second to tell her she needs to ask one thing before they continue. Jiri is internally losing it, wondering if she's looking at high-level barrier magic. She can't believe a girl like Myra actually saw her mana traces and managed to trap her like this. Looking pretty hurt by the whole situation, Myra just wants to know why Jiri decided to target her in the first place. Jiri gets defensive, telling Myra that if she hates her, she should just punish her directly instead of threatening everyone else around them. Raul steps in with a stone-cold look, making it clear that he has zero plans to get the town or Jiri involved in anything more than what's already happened. But Jiri is still panicking, frantically telling Myra she doesn't even know who she is and that they've never met before today. She ends up pointing the finger at Raul, yelling that the whole mess is actually his fault. Jiri starts complaining that Raul never pays any attention to her, making him look pretty confused. She admits she only started this whole mess because he wouldn't listen to her, and she explains that Count Dialo's personal soldiers have been swarming the area and bothering her with questions. The mention of the Count's name hits Raul like a ton of bricks, so Jiri continues, saying she knew a commotion would bring those soldiers running to investigate. She figured they deserved to be just as annoyed as she was, but she confesses that her plan was really just to mess with the door and scare them. It wouldn't open properly, so she pushed her magic too hard and melted the lock before bailing out. Raul starts stressing out and cursing under his breath about their luck. He's realized they might have actually been followed since they left the inn, leaving Myra to step in and tell Jiri she needs to apologize to the innkeeper and pay for the door. Jiri agrees to make it right, but her focus is already shifting back toward Raul. Watching him closely, Jiri thinks about how Raul has always been a stiff guy, but his current vibe feels way more on edge than usual. She keeps analyzing things, from his reaction to Yahello's name to Myra's weird comments and the timing of this whole escort job. Everything starts to click for her as she stares at Myra, wondering if this girl is actually the famous saintess everyone is after. Jiri wonders how a fake could even use barriers or mana detection, thinking maybe playing the part gave her some power, but she decides it's just easier to ask her. Jiri doesn't hold back and starts asking if Myra is actually just a fake, but Myra quickly cuts her off by putting a finger to her lips, begging her not to say another word. Jiri thinks the kid is actually pretty cute, then tells them they need to move since the pickup is done and soldiers are closing in. As they go to leave, Jiri stops them and warns that walking through the middle of town is a bad idea, so they should take the back road behind her. She mentions some gossip about why Yahello's men are hunting the fake saint, saying the story is they're trying to save a frail girl named Marielle, who was supposedly cursed by Myra herself. Jiri keeps going with this crazy story, explaining that while it started as a small rumor, the lie has spread through the whole area like wildfire. Now everyone is blaming Myra for everything from monster attacks to random illnesses, thinking that capturing her will solve all their problems. The Count even got the prince to sign off on catching her, which made the public believe the rumors were actually true. Jiri warns them that even regular people are hunting for the reward money now, so they should stick to the outer walls to stay out of sight. Raul finishes up with Jiri, thanking her for the solid info and admitting he's not too proud to take the help. But as they try to leave, someone suddenly screams at them to stay right where they are. Two guys in dark cloaks show up and immediately point out Myra, calling her the short one in the robe, and just then a huge blast goes off that sends one of the guys flying. Raul yells that it was a good move and tells her to run, so Myra starts booking it, but she still makes sure to shout back that the dried fruit was awesome and to tell the shopkeeper hi. Back in the alley, the soldiers are totally dazed on the ground while Jiri acts surprised, asking where the hell they went. Then she hits them with a fake lead, grinning as she tells the soldiers they ran off toward the middle of town. Myra asks Raul if they're going back to the mountain, but he says they have to hit the plains first because the mountains are a bad spot, since the guys chasing them have mountain horses that would catch up to them in the hills way too fast. Plus the town is full of blind spots and people who might try to jump them, so they just keep moving. Raul looks ahead with a really serious look on his face. He tells Myra they're going to cut off the risk of being caught right now. Behind them, one of the soldiers yells that the two of them look suspicious and orders the rest of the squad to seize them. As they run towards some gates, Raul points out that there are farms and villages up ahead that eventually lead to the highway, and he explains that a straight run is a bad move, so they're using the tight path to narrow down where the soldiers can actually go. One of the riders levels a crossbow, reminding his guys that the orders are to bring them in alive, so they should only aim for their arms and legs. Raul sees the weapons pointing at their backs and yells that the ranged guys are on target, but he's already got a plan in mind. But then a massive rumbling sound starts up, and Myra looks totally shocked as she tries to tell him to wait. The soldier doesn't even care if he hits a vital spot, thinking to himself that they're just a couple of criminals and adventurers who don't matter. Raul shouts that he's about to give the signal, but Myra's already panicking and screaming that something big is headed their way. A carriage smashes into the dirt, narrowly missing them both. A massive shadow covers Raul and Myra as a giant beast flies overhead. The soldiers chasing them completely lose it, screaming that a dragon has shown up. Myra looks at Raul with a suspicious face, asking him if this dragon was actually part of his plan. Raul looks a bit stressed, admitting that having something that huge fly in was definitely not expected. But Myra watches the sky and notices the beast is just circling around. She wonders if it's looking for a target. Raul doesn't waste time and hijacks a horse, telling Myra to hop on. She asks if he even knows how to ride, and he just says he learned a while ago, leaving the soldier behind yelling about his stolen ride. As they speed off, Myra points out that the caravan is heading out of the country and trying to hide in the farming village. Raul tells her they're going to cut straight through them, since a caravan is definitely going to have guards to deal with. He realizes the situation is worse than it looks and yells that the monster is actually targeting the people in the caravan. The thing is so huge that Raul knows the town adventurers will see it and come running, but he admits they can't save everyone. One of the guys running says that since Yahello's soldiers cleared out, they finally have a clear shot at the border. Raul knows they have to move fast before the village gets packed with refugees and blocks their path. So he tells Myra this is their chance while everyone is looking the other way. Myra starts breaking down, crying about why they're the ones who have to deal with all this mess. She thinks about using her power to put up a barrier, but she's stuck in her head blaming herself for the whole situation. It doesn't help that the people nearby are losing it, yelling that the fake saint is the one who brought all this disaster on them. Raul sees her spiraling and yells at her to snap out of it and listen to what he has to say. As they speed past the panicking crowd, he tells her straight up that he isn't interested in choosing who lives or dies. With the monster still hovering over the screaming villagers, Raul tells her he can't rely on her for help right now. He keeps it real and says he doesn't have the strength to save everyone, so his only plan is to make sure she stays safe. He looks more determined than ever, saying he's going to protect her even if it goes against everything a saint is supposed to stand for. Myra is stuck in her head, sweating and barely holding it together as she tries to remember what she actually stands for. She realizes that hiding away and ignoring the chaos isn't the kind of saint she promised her mother she'd be. Thinking back to when she was younger, she always wanted to make things easier for her mom. But meanwhile, some of the villagers are losing their cool. One woman starts saying that if Myra had never shown up, then the higher-ups wouldn't have to deal with all this stress and suffering over the state of the country. The crowd is getting nastier by the second, and one guy even yells out that she's going to end up cursed. Another guy with a beard just completely loses it, screaming at the top of his lungs for everyone to stop mocking him. Myra decides she's seen enough and starts running back toward the danger. Even as people nearby are cowering from the explosions, Raul watches her and realizes he finally gets what being a saint is actually about, just as a massive swarm of monsters fills the sky. He grabs his giant wrapped sword and thinks that if he can just wipe them out or buy enough time for the evacuation, they might actually have a shot. Raul tells Myra they need to give this everything they've got, and she agrees, promising not to push him too far. He takes off like a blur, moving so fast across the battlefield he's almost impossible to see. While he fights, Raul yells back that he'll thin out the crowd as much as possible while she focuses on guarding the villagers. So Myra gets to work as the people below completely lose it, begging for anyone to save them from the massive dragon overhead. She looks up and realizes the dragon is just a factory for more monsters, and her basic purification isn't going to be enough. The pressure is on because despite her title, she's never actually been in a real fight like this before. There's no telling what kind of damage she'll do to her own body if she keeps pushing her limits. But Myra knows there's only one way out, so she screams that they're going to end this whole thing in one single hit. She starts forming a massive barrier around the dragon, planning to flood the entire space with her full power. And just to make sure the job gets done, she clenches her fist to compress all that energy into one point. Myra puts every bit of her strength into the attack, screaming for more power as the energy hits. The dragon gets completely vaporized by the blast, leaving Myra standing there as the dust starts to settle. She looks back to check on the others while Raul holds Maria, totally stunned that just the aftershock of her hit was enough to clear the field. He can't even wrap his head around it, thinking that her power is just way beyond anything a normal person should be able to do. Seeing everyone safe makes Myra think back to her mother and the life she left behind. She smiles, just happy that no one got hurt, even though she's still hiding the truth about who she really is. She's been carrying this huge weight on her shoulders for so long, and it's starting to show. Meanwhile, nearby villagers are starting to crawl out of hiding, frantically asking Lord Jader what in the world just happened. The kids are still terrified, crying and wondering where all those monsters went so suddenly. Prince Arthur kneels down to keep them calm, telling the kids it's going to be okay and to stay put while he goes to check out the situation himself. Arthur tries to process what just happened while checking on the kids. That light he saw has him wondering if it could really be what he thinks. One of the villagers is completely losing it, shouting about how a single girl just erased a disaster-class dragon in a second, and others nearby are just as stunned, saying the whole thing felt like a storm. They can't even tell if it was real or an illusion since it looked like a straight-up miracle. The guys standing around agree that no normal magic could ever be on a scale like that. While people scramble to save their luggage in the chaos, a little girl tells everyone that the big sister is the one who saved them. The kid is totally convinced now, yelling out to anyone who will listen that the girl was definitely a saintess. With the dragon gone and the area safe, the guards look around and ask where the girl actually went. Meanwhile, Myra is tucked away in a quiet room, lying in bed looking completely dazed. Raul walks into the room with some water, noticing her eyes are open and telling her he sees she's finally awake. He gives her a small smile, asking if she had any good dreams and if that straw bed treated her all right. Myra greets Raul back with a quick good morning, looking a little flustered as she says she needs a minute to tidy up. Raul explains they're staying in a hut at the edge of a village, but Myra freezes when he mentions she's been out for 3 whole days. As he starts talking about the people from the attack, Myra looks down at her cup and apologizes for rushing out after he told her not to. Raul tells her not to worry about him, asking instead if she can sit up or if she's having any trouble breathing or feeling any pain. She looks at her hand and says she feels all right, figuring the collapse was just backlash from using a power she's never touched before. Surprisingly, she doesn't feel tired at all right now. If anything, she can feel a new sense of power building up inside her. Raul admits that's pretty impressive before mentioning that the people she saved managed to gather their gear and head toward town. He says they're likely waiting for new wagons to continue their trip across the border, and it's a miracle nobody was seriously hurt. But after he calls that the good news, Myra stops drinking her tea and asks if that means there's something bad he's not saying. Raul gets a serious look on his face and lets her know the reality of the situation. They lost all their supplies. Raul explains that while he managed to toss Count Yahello's soldiers aside during the chaos, he's got no clue where they ended up. And to make things worse, Myra's bag probably got ripped off and lost when she put up that massive barrier, meaning the two of them are officially flat broke with nothing left to their names. Raul seems pretty chill about it, but suddenly a voice yells from outside the hut, asking if the Lady Saint is actually in there. Myra just sits there holding her drink, as a huge crowd of villagers gathers by the door, begging for just one look at the miracle saint so they can thank her properly. Raul mentions they've been showing up every day like clockwork, so he's been sticking close to make sure she gets some peace and quiet. He admits he was actually ready to just leave those people behind, but Myra's choice to jump in and help saved a ton of lives. So in his eyes, she definitely earned all the praise she's getting right now. Myra looks at the ground, thinking about all the happy faces in the village, but she quietly says she doesn't think she's actually that admirable. She looks over at Raul and finally comes clean, telling him the truth is she's just been really angry through this whole thing. Myra admits she's been holding on to a lot of anger toward the people for turning on her, and at herself, because she just can't accept how it all went down. Tool looks at her calmly and says that being a saint isn't just about doing one single thing, which leads into the queen explaining that for Royalis to ever find real peace, the kingdom has to face the fears that have been there for 80 years. That way, when a new saint is finally born, she'll be someone who truly loves the people and gets that same love back from them. As a carriage travels through the countryside, Myra thinks about how she barely ever left the castle back then, so going out like this felt like her first real duty as a saint. She started her journey with nothing but modest hopes and a ton of pride in her heart. Seeing the crowds of villagers gathered to see her, she really wanted to live up to that warm welcome. All that pride she carried while waving to the crowds from the balcony with Arthur, and the strong bonds she spent an entire year building with every person she met along the way. It's clear the people really look up to her as she walks through the village, reaching out to connect with them one last time. Arthur looks completely stressed out while Myra watches him. She thought she had already found the strength to move on. But the reality is much harsher, with people yelling that if she's getting exiled, she should at least leave quietly without causing trouble. She realizes that if she didn't stand up for herself, the public was just going to keep pinning all the blame on her. And yet, even while looking at their angry faces, she tried her best to believe that the common people weren't the ones at fault. Everything goes dark as she starts to wonder if after all that work, did the past year of her life even mean anything? She looks at the shouting crowd and wonders if a single one of them even questioned the lies they were being told, or if they just enjoyed hurling insults and repeating every nasty rumor they heard. It's a lot to take in, so Myra keeps telling herself over and over not to blame them. But it's getting harder as she watches Irano and Raul, realizing just how fast the kingdom accepted this new saintess without a second thought. The bitter thought hits her that maybe they dropped her so easily, just because she was always an outsider to them. The crowd keeps shouting and pointing as Raul and Myra ride away. She admits she hesitated for a second because she can't stop wondering how many of those people actually believed the rumors about her being a fake. It's a thought that has been stuck in her head for a long time. Myra feels like she failed her duty, and it makes her angry to feel betrayed by the very expectations she chose to have. Raul looks at her and says that feeling like that is actually pretty normal, and he points out that her duty was never supposed to be this mess. Myra looks completely exhausted while Raul keeps talking, telling her it's fine if her resolve shakes sometimes, and even if she gets the logic of it, she's still allowed to be mad. Meanwhile, the public is already moving on, cheering for the new saintess like she's some kind of gift from heaven. Raul looks Myra right in the eye. He just wants her to remember that she's only human after all, but to him, she's anything but ordinary. He stands there thinking about how Myra is actually someone special, especially since she's nothing like that other saintess. Even after everything, she doesn't lose her way or let her ideals waver for a second. Myra looks completely locked in even with all the pressure. She just doesn't lose her way or falter like the other saintess did. Raul watches her rest and realizes she's nothing like the girl everyone is cheering for now. He starts thinking to himself about how he was slowly putting Myra on a pedestal and starts feeling like an idiot for overthinking things. He looks down, pretty annoyed with himself because it's obvious she's different. Myra sits there looking a little confused while Raul stands over her. Then he sits down next to her and apologizes. He admits he didn't really understand what a real saint was supposed to be until he met her. Myra gives him a small smile and says his way of thinking is actually pretty normal, and she thanks him for helping her feel better. Raul leans back and asks her what she wants to do now that they're leaving it all behind. He stares at her, wondering what's going on in her head, and as he waits, Myra looks back at him. She says she wants to tell him everything, all the things she wants to do and even the stuff she doesn't. Myra mentions she just woke up and feels like she could probably use some more sleep, but she admits she's actually starving. Raul just laughs and says he's feeling the exact same way. Then Myra gets serious again, saying she really wants to find a way to help every single person in the kingdom if she's actually able to do it. She explains she can't stop thinking about how her barrier was fading out, and yet nobody else bothered to set a new one up. She only agreed to be exiled because she thought the new saint was the real deal, so she let her magic go, but now she's terrified of what might be happening to the people left in the capital. Raul starts thinking that if Marielle is a total fake or just can't use her powers, then a lot of people are going to die before his brother can even make a move. Myra looks down, saying she's seen monsters tear through people before and she can already see that kind of nightmare spreading across the whole land, making Raul second-guess everything. He thought leaving it to his brother was the right move, but seeing the danger, he wonders if they can really just walk away from this. Myra looks back on everything and admits she hesitated for a split second, and in that moment, she saw the faces of all those people begging for help. She tells Raul she just couldn't accept leaving them behind to die. Raul just watches her as she gets worked up, yelling about how the way they talked about her was totally awful. While Raul gets his gear ready, Myra brings up how he mentioned the people were sensitive about the whole fake saint thing. She sits on the bed, feeling bad because she realizes her silence probably made everyone way more anxious than she thought, and she admits she didn't really get it. But then she gets fired up again, complaining that things went way too far and too fast, wondering why they think capturing her solves anything. Raul leans in with a smirk and asks if she's just irritated, so Myra just gives him a flat look, telling him to quit teasing her. Raul stands up and decides it's time to move. He looks at her and says they should get going, since he's decided the two of them are just going to go ahead and save everyone themselves. Raul looks at her with a confident grin and says they're going to reveal her identity and do it right out in the open, telling Myra it's finally time to show the world what the real Saint of Itas is actually like. He explains that they used to focus on avoiding trouble to get her home, but if they're going to help people, there's no point in hiding anymore. He promises Myra that her mission won't be left unfinished, telling her she can see this through on her own terms, and if her title feels like it's holding her back, they'll just break those chains. He calls this the start of the second act in the story to save the kingdom, and treats it like the beginning of her second life. But Myra looks worried, thinking about how her brother is probably searching for her and wondering if Tura is okay. Raul holds up a finger and tells her he's been thinking about Tura too, saying she's likely safe, though he'll have to explain why later. Moving on to her brother, Raul points out that hearing about a saint named Myra of Itas saving people would probably make him feel a lot better, but Myra just looks down, feeling like the people only want their own saint, Marielle, and she's just pushing herself on them. Raul holds up two fingers and reminds Myra that she was summoned by the king to save the country anyway, telling her if she feels like she's forcing herself on people, that's actually the king's fault. But he gets serious, looking at his scarred hand and warning her that not everyone is going to be cool with her, saying some will be hateful while others will just try to use her. He puts his hand over his heart and makes a promise, telling Myra that from now on he'll be her sword. Myra's eyes go wide as he adds a bit of a joke, saying his sword might just be his fists depending on the fight, but either way, they're going to save people. Myra looks up at him, sounding a bit overwhelmed as she asks why he's doing all of this, wondering why he's thinking so much about her. Raul just gives her a small smile and says he has the same reason she does, admitting he just felt like he had to help. He points out that his job is to guard her until they cross the border anyway, and says that if fewer people die along the way, that's a win for him too. They sit there together while Raul tells her she wasn't wrong to leave the big stuff to her brother, encouraging her to just trust her gut. As he starts to move, he tells her that even if she ends up regretting a choice she thought was right back then, he's still going to believe in the person she really is, no matter what.